Hello everyone, I know you are going to use this video for falling asleep, so before that, like this video, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you are from, also what time is it. It started with the deer. Not just any deer, mind you. This one didn't bolt when I stepped into the clearing. It didn't twitch or sniff the air or stomp its leg like they usually do when they catch a scent they don't like. It stood still. Too still, watching me. Its head was tilted slightly, just a little too far to the side, like something had twisted it there, and it had forgotten how to straighten it. Its eyes were the worst part, big, dark, almost glassy, like beads. But there was something behind them, something that looked back, something that saw me, not as a person, but as prey. That was last week, and every night since then, I've felt them. Eyes. In the trees, watching, waiting. It's funny. You think you know your hometown. I grew up in Fairhaven, a tiny speck of a place in northern Vermont surrounded by endless woods and whispering hills. Everybody knows everybody, and we all grow up with the same warnings. Don't go too far into the forest. Don't wander off the marked trails, and never, ever, go past the black stump. I used to think it was just small-town folklore. Stories parents tell to keep kids from getting lost or falling into some river. But now I'm not so sure. Not after what happened. Not after what I saw. Not after what followed me home. The clearing where I saw the deer is about 2 miles behind my parents' property. I was just out hiking that afternoon, something I did often when I needed to clear my head. I'd lost my job a week prior, and I was back in town to regroup. Staying at the old family house, trying to figure out my next step. There's something about the woods that always made things feel smaller. Problems shrink when you're surrounded by towering pines and chirping chickadees. But that day the woods were quiet. Too quiet. No birdsong. No rustling squirrels. Even the wind seemed to hush the moment I stepped off the trail. I hadn't meant to leave it. I was distracted, lost in thought. Then I saw the clearing. The deer stood there, motionless, its ribs pushed out like jagged bones beneath thin fur. But it didn't look starved. It looked wrong, like a costume stretched too tight over something else. Something that didn't quite understand how a deer was supposed to move. It held my stare for a long time, long enough for me to forget to breathe. Then its mouth moved. Not opened, moved. The lips quivered, twitched. Then they curled, not into a snarl, not into a growl, into a smile. I don't remember running. I remember falling, scraping my palms, my shirt snagging on thorns, branches slapping my face. I remember not looking back. That was important. That was the only rule that suddenly came rushing back into my head like a whispered command. I didn't know I knew. Don't look back. I burst from the trees 20 minutes later, covered in sweat and scratches, heart trying to punch through my ribs. I told myself I'd imagined it, that it was the stress, that I hadn't been sleeping, that it was just a sick deer with a disease. Then the knocks started, soft, barely there, on my window. The first night I thought it was just a branch, the wind, something normal, something rational. But it kept happening, every night, 3:17 a.m., exactly, the same pattern. 3 slow taps. Then silence. I didn't look. I couldn't. Because the next rule came back too. Don't open the curtains. I didn't know where I'd heard that. But it pressed on me, heavy, like something passed down in blood instead of words. Something ancient and feral. My grandmother used to say weird things like that. Rules for the woods. For the things in the dark. I thought it was just dementia. Now I'm not so sure. The 4th night, I broke. I peeked. Just a tiny crack in the curtain, and I saw it. It was standing just beyond the edge of the trees, not close enough to see clearly, but close enough to know it wasn't human. Tall. Wrong. Bent in places people don't bend. Its arms were too long, its fingers too thin. But it was the face that made my stomach twist. Because it wasn't a face. It was a deer skull. But not just any skull, it moved. The jaw opened slowly, creaking like old wood. Then it smiled, just like the deer in the clearing. I stumbled back, heart thundering in my ears. When I looked again, it was gone. No footprints in the dew-soaked grass, no broken branches, just the silence and the feeling that I wasn't alone. I tried telling my parents. My dad laughed it off. My mom looked worried, but said I was just having a hard time. She made tea, told me to get rest. I didn't tell them about the smell. The coppery, rotting stink that crept in through the walls at night, like something long dead was breathing against the house. The fifth night, the knocking moved. Not the window this time, the front door. Still 3:17 a.m. Still 3 knocks. And this time, a voice. It didn't speak like a person. It sounded like someone imitating a voice, like an echo that learned to talk. High, pitched, drawn out. Liam, my name. Drawn through teeth, whispered through bone. I didn't answer. I didn't breathe. I waited, gripping the bat I'd found in the garage. My body screamed to move, to run, to do anything but sit there frozen. But I couldn't. Because now I remembered the third rule. Never answer when it knows your name. Morning came. The smell faded. The knocks didn't come during the day. But something else did. Scratches. Not animal scratches. Not from raccoons or cats. These were too tall. Too deliberate. Like something with claws had traced long, careful lines into the wood of the door. 4 marks. Over and over again. I tried to leave that day. Packed a bag, got into my car, started the engine. But the road was gone. Not blocked. Gone. Where the gravel path should have been, there was nothing but trees. Endless. Stretched out in all directions. The road had simply vanished. I checked my phone. No signal. Tried the GPS. It showed me in the middle of a forest. No roads. No towns. Just blank green. I went back to the house. My parents were gone. Just gone. Their cars were still there. The lights were on. The coffee was half drunk on the counter. But the house was silent. Empty. I searched every room. Every closet. The attic. The basement. Nothing. Until I saw the note. It was on the fridge. In my mom's handwriting. Don't follow the lights. Don't listen if it calls. Don't look into its eyes. There was something scrawled beneath it, hastily. As if written while shaking. It's not a deer. It wears a deer. It learns. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, clutching the bat, eyes fixed on the tree line. The knocks came. 3:17. Right on time. But this time it didn't stop at the door. I heard footsteps, heavy, wet, across the porch. Then down the hall. It was inside. I gripped the bat tighter, praying it wouldn't open my door. That it couldn't. But then I saw the handle move. Just a twitch. A test. It learns. It's trying to understand us. Then it whispered again. Lee, I am. Don't hide. Its voice was closer now. Just behind the door. I didn't move. Not even when something scraped against the floor outside my room. Something long. Something hard. Like antlers. Then silence. Morning came. The door was untouched. But the walls, they were covered in marks. Not scratches this time. Words. Over and over again. Love ETMEIN. And in the middle of it all, my name. I'm writing this because I don't know how much longer I have. Something is happening in these woods. Something old. Something that doesn't want to be seen, but needs to be watched. It's not just the deer. There are others. I've seen them, just at the edge of my vision, shifting between the trees, wearing faces that look like people I knew, but wrong. Skin too pale, eyes too wide, movements just a little too slow. They're watching, they're learning, and they're getting closer. Whatever this is, it started with the deer. But it won't end there. And I'm beginning to think I was never supposed to leave the clearing, because something followed me back. And now, every night it gets a little bolder. And tonight, for the first time, it didn't knock. It whispered through the keyhole. I saw you. And now I know, it's inside. It's hard to explain the way fear feels when it stops being sudden. When it stops being a sharp stab in the chest and becomes something else. Something slow, heavy, like a sickness that sinks into your bones. That's what the days feel like now. They drag. Every tick of the clock feels like it's crawling toward another 3:17 a.m. Every shadow looks like something just about to move. And worst of all, the thing that followed me, it's getting smarter. The morning after I found the message carved into the walls, I did what anyone would. I tried to wipe it away, scrubbed with bleach and steel wool until my hands were raw, but the words didn't come off. They were burned in, like the letters had been pressed into the wood with heat or acid. Latamianen. Again and again, circling my name like a ritual, like a chant. Something about it made me feel tainted, as if reading the words too long would let it inside me too. I tried to leave again, thinking maybe I'd missed something before. I walked down the driveway, past the mailbox, and into the woods. I figured if the road wasn't where it should be, I'd go until I hit something, anything. Another road, a river, a cabin. I didn't care. I just wanted out. But the woods didn't move like they used to. Every tree looked the same. Every turn brought me back to something I'd already seen. A tree with a heart carved into it. A half-fallen log covered in moss. A broken beer bottle from my high school days. I passed it 4 times, like I was walking in circles. But I wasn't. I was moving straight. I know I was. I left markings, broke branches, even dropped my lighter behind me. But they never stayed gone. Every few hundred steps, I'd see that same lighter again, resting on the same rock. I wasn't alone in those woods either. I could hear breathing, not from behind me, not from the side above, like something was in the trees. Following, I looked up once. Just once. I don't know what I saw. I don't want to remember. It had too many limbs. Or not enough. My brain couldn't decide. But I know it moved when I looked away. I heard the creak of branches, the flutter of leaves without wind. And then laughter. Not a child's laugh. Not joyful or silly. It was wrong, high, pitched, crooked. Like someone who'd heard laughing in a movie once and was trying to mimic it, but didn't understand what made it funny. That sound chased me all the way back to the house. I didn't stop running until I slammed the door shut and locked every bolt I could find. But when I caught my breath, my lighter was on the kitchen table. I didn't put it there. That was when I realized something else. It wasn't just haunting me. It was inside the house. Somehow, some part of it had gotten in. And it was toying with me. I checked every room again. Every closet. Every drawer. Looking for hidden doors, broken windows, anything that might explain how it had slipped through. But the house was untouched. Neat. Clean. Except for the basement. I hadn't gone down there since I got back to Fairhaven. The door had been stuck. The light switch always broken. But now it was open. Just a crack. Just enough for the smell to seep through. That same smell from the woods. Copper. Rot. Wet earth and something else. Something like old meat left in the sun. I should have left it alone. I should have run. But curiosity is a funny thing. It doesn't always protect us. Sometimes it's the very reason we get hurt. I opened the door. The stairs creaked louder than they should have, each groan of wood sounding like a scream under my feet. I flipped the switch. Nothing. Just darkness. But something moved in it. I heard it. Shifting. Breathing. No, mimicking breathing. Like it was practicing how to sound like me. I held up my phone for light and stepped down, one step at a time, the beam flickering against the cold stone walls. There was nothing there. Just old boxes, a rusted tool bench, and the water heater humming quietly in the corner. Until I turned around and saw the drawings, hundreds of them, covering the far wall, sketched in something black and crusted. I don't think it was ink. They were crude, but clear. The same figure, over and over, tall, thin, limbs too long, antlers. But each drawing was different. One had no eyes. One had a mouth on its chest. One was crawling. One was hanging from a tree. But all of them had one thing in common. They were watching. And beneath each drawing, written in shaky handwriting, my name, Lelayam, over and over. I backed away, heart thudding, and then I saw the last one. It wasn't just drawn. It was fresh, still wet, still dripping, and its eyes were open. That night, I boarded up the basement door. Hammered it shut with every nail I could find. I didn't care if it looked crazy. I knew something had come through. Something that didn't belong in this world, and I wasn't going to let it in again. But it didn't need the basement anymore. That night, it came through the walls. 3:17 a.m. The clock didn't tick. It stopped. Time held its breath. I was sitting in the living room, bat in hand, when the paint began to bubble. The wall beside me stretched like skin. Then it split. A hand pushed through. Thin, pale, nails like thorns. It clawed at the air, feeling, searching. And it was followed by a voice. But not mine this time. Not my mother's. My father's. Liam, it rasped. Open the door, son. It's cold outside. I knew it wasn't him. My father has a deep voice. Calm, strong. This one cracked and hissed, like a record warped by fire. But it said the things he would have said. The things I wanted to hear. We've been looking for you. Come on now. Be a good boy. The wall tore wider. The thing leaned through. Half-formed, part flesh, part shadow. Wearing my father's face like a mask stretched over something else. And it was smiling. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I did the only thing I could think to do. I ran. Out the back door. Into the woods. I know. The rules say not to. But I had no choice. I ran until the house was gone. Until the thing's voice was swallowed by the trees. And then I saw the lights. Tiny ones. Flickering between the branches. Blue. Green. Soft gold. They looked like fireflies at first. But they moved too slowly. Too intentionally. And I remembered the note. Don't follow the lights. So I closed my eyes. Covered them with my hands. Turned away. But the lights followed me. I didn't look, but I felt them. Warm. Almost comforting. That was the trick. They made me want to look. But I didn't. And finally, they faded. I stumbled until dawn, then made my way back to the house. It was untouched. No broken walls. No drawings. No smell. But something was different. There was a note on the table. Not written by me. Not my mother's handwriting either. It simply said you saw it. Now it sees you. It never stops learning. And underneath, in red, next time, it won't knock. Now I sit here, writing this as the sun begins to fade again. I don't know what tomorrow brings. I don't even know if I'll have a tomorrow. But I know this much. The thing in the trees, it's not just watching anymore. It's remembering. And it's waiting. Waiting for me to break the last rule. Because deep down, it knows something I don't want to admit. Sooner or later I will. The forest was never quiet before. I grew up with the sounds of it. Crickets, owls, coyotes far off, even the wind sighing through the leaves like it was sharing secrets. But not anymore. Now the silence is a living thing. It crawls. It watches. It waits. It stretches over everything like a thick wool blanket, choking out sound and time. Even the air tastes different, like it's been exhaled by something not meant to breathe. After the note appeared, I barely slept. Every part of me buzzed with dread, a constant static beneath my skin. I stayed awake through the night, curled in a chair in the corner of the living room, bat gripped in white, knuckled fists, eyes fixed on the front door. I told myself it wouldn't come again, not so soon. But I was wrong. The knock didn't come at 3:17 this time. It came at 3:12. 5 minutes early. I felt it before I heard it. The shift. The cold. The sense that something vast had stirred just beyond the veil. The air went still, heavy like water. Then came the sound. Not a knock this time, not fingers tapping on glass. It was breathing. Slow, ragged, deliberate. Right outside the window. I didn't move. I knew the rules. No peeking, no eye contact, no responding. But then I heard it say her name. Sophie. My sister. Sophie. It rasped again, the voice softer, more desperate, as if it were pleading. He's gone. Please, please let me in. My sister died 5 years ago. Car accident. Rain. A tree. No one could have survived it, let alone walked out of it. So when I heard her voice, my blood turned to ice. It wasn't perfect. It was close, far too close for comfort, but it stumbled in weird places. She used to draw out her vowels when she was tired, and this version of her didn't. She had a little hitch in her laugh, a hiccup that came at the end, and this voice. This thing tried to mimic it, but couldn't quite get the rhythm right. It was trying, practicing. Like a child repeating words it didn't fully understand, and it said something it shouldn't have known. You still wear the necklace I gave you, don't you? The one with the glass bird. I hadn't told anyone I kept it. It hung around my neck that very moment, tucked under my shirt like a secret I'd buried in memory. No one had seen it. Not even my parents. So how did it know? That's when I understood. It wasn't just watching me anymore. It was inside me. Not physically. I'd know if it had broken in like that. But it had found a way into my memories. It had plucked something personal, something painful, and used it like a knife to pry me open. I almost answered. I almost said her name. But I caught myself in time. Bit down on my tongue so hard I tasted blood, because I remembered the warning, the one that chilled me more than any other. Never answer when it knows your name, and never ever answer when it uses someone else's. The voice went quiet after a while, but the damage was done. My mind couldn't stop spinning. If it could imitate Sophie, how many other voices did it wear like skin? How many people had it watched long enough to fake them? To speak with their mouths, to walk in their shoes. I didn't sleep after that. Couldn't. I stayed up through the morning, watched the sunrise leak through the curtains like it was afraid to enter too quickly. That's when I made a mistake. I looked outside. I just wanted to check, to make sure it hadn't left anything behind. But when I looked down at the porch, I saw them. Footprints. But not human. They were hooved. Like a deer's, but too big, too deep. Like something heavy had passed through. Something that shouldn't have stood on two legs, but did, and beside them in the dew-covered wood, a handprint. Long, fingered, sharp, and burned into the center of the palm. My name again. Liam. That was when the dream started. At first, I didn't realize I'd fallen asleep. It was more like slipping. One moment I was awake. The next, I was standing in the forest. Only it wasn't the forest I knew. It was too still. Too dark. The trees towered higher than they should have. Impossibly tall, their trunks blackened like they'd been scorched. The sky above was smeared with a thick, blood-colored haze, and hanging from the branches were bodies. Not whole ones. Not anymore. Twisted, skinned, hollowed. But every face I passed I recognized. Old teachers. Childhood friends, my uncle, my next-door neighbor, all staring with empty eyes, mouths stretched in silent screams. I turned to run, but the trees shifted behind me, rearranged themselves, pushed me forward, like the whole forest was breathing, tightening its grip, hurting me like an animal. Then I saw it, in the distance, tall, silent, standing between the trees like it had grown there, the thing, antlers, hollow face, long limbs. But worse than that, my face. It was wearing my face, not like a mask. It was me, and it smiled. That sick, too wide grin I'd seen on the deer. The one that stretched just a little too far, too unnatural, too gleeful for anything alive. Then it spoke. I'm getting better. I woke up screaming, sweat-drenched, cold, my neck burning where the necklace touched skin. I ripped it off and threw it across the room. It felt hot, like it had been sitting in fire. From then on, sleep wasn't rest. It was a battleground. Every time I closed my eyes, it found me a little faster. The dream twisted further. It didn't just wear my face, it wore others. It walked like me, talked like me. It started whispering my own thoughts back to me, and it kept repeating the same phrase. You looked, you listened. Now you learn. I started noticing small changes during the day. Things just slightly off. The photographs on the wall. Smiles too wide. The voice of the radio host. Warbled, wrong, repeating the same sentence in a loop under the music. My reflection. It blinked when I didn't. I even tried recording myself at night. Set up an old camera I found in the attic. It had a motion sensor, a little red light that turned on when it picked something up. I pressed record before bed and sat with my back to it, just watching the screen on my laptop. For 2 hours, nothing. Then, around 2:58 a.m., the light came on. At first, the feed just showed me. Still. Quiet. Then I shifted. Only I didn't. The me on the screen turned to the camera, slowly, deliberately, and it smiled. I stared at the screen, paralyzed, as my double tilted its head and lifted one hand, waving. I turned around. The room was empty. But when I turned back, the camera was facing me, and the other me was gone. I smashed it. I had to. I've been writing this all morning, trying to make sense of it. Trying to figure out where the nightmare ends and the waking terror begins. But I think I've known the truth for a while now. It doesn't matter if I'm asleep or awake. It's always watching. And now I think it's trying to become me, to take everything I am, wear it like skin, and walk out into the world. Because last night, I found something under my bed, a mirror, not broken, not dusty, just new, placed perfectly in the center, reflecting the underside of the mattress, and written across the glass, in something thick and black, TRAD Pilaceus. I don't know how much longer I can resist, but I know what it wants now. It doesn't just want in, it wants out, and it wants to wear me to do it. I woke up with dirt in my mouth. Not a metaphor, actual dirt. Cold, damp soil packed between my teeth, clinging to my tongue, gritty against my gums. I gagged and sat up, spitting mud onto the hardwood floor. My throat was raw, my lips cracked, my nose full of that scent again, earth, rot, and something far fouler hiding beneath. I scrambled to my feet and stumbled to the bathroom, half blind, only to find my hands caked in the same dark grime. My fingernails were packed with it, as if I'd been digging all night. But digging what? And where? There were scratches on my arms. Deep. Fresh. My shirt torn. My feet bare and wet, leaving muddy prints across the floor. I didn't remember leaving the house. Didn't remember anything beyond sitting in the living room chair, clutching the bat, trying to stay awake, but the door was unlocked. Wide open. Outside, the world was quiet again. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the wrong kind. The kind that presses against your skull like pressure underwater. Trees stood still. No birds, no rustling. Just that heavy silence, and a line of footprints in the mud leading from the porch into the woods. My footprints. But I didn't remember making them. I followed them. I had to. Each step felt like walking deeper into someone else's dream. The trees seemed taller than before, older, leaning in like curious giants. The light barely made it through the thick canopy above. The footprints led straight. No hesitation. No wandering. They knew where they were going. They led me to a mound, freshly disturbed earth in a shallow clearing. No animals, no insects. Just a lump in the center of the forest that hadn't been there before. I knew what I was about to find before I even started digging, but I couldn't stop. I dropped to my knees and clawed at the dirt like a man possessed. It came away soft, loose, like someone had just finished the job. My fingers hit fabric first, then something cold and solid, then me. Not breathing, not blinking. My face, staring up at me from the hole, eyes open, lips slightly parted. The same shirt I was wearing, the same scratches on the arms. Only this version of me didn't move. And the worst part, the smile. Just like the deer, just like the face in the basement, wide, crooked, like it had been carved there. I stumbled back, hands shaking, mouth open in a scream that never came. My chest heaved, but no sound came out. I backed away, tripped over a root, and crawled until I had the strength to run. When I got back to the house, the door was closed, locked, from the inside. I banged on it, shouting my own name. "Lime! Let me in!" Nothing. Then, through the small window beside the door, I saw me, standing in the hallway, perfectly still, watching. But it wasn't quite right. The head tilted too far, the arms hung too low, and the smile, God, the smile, spread across its face like oil over water. It lifted a hand and waved slowly, mimicking, mocking. Then it turned and disappeared into the house. I stood there for what felt like hours. The cold seeped into my bones, but I didn't move. I couldn't. My home, my body, wasn't mine anymore. Something had taken it. Something from the trees. Something that watched and waited and learned. And now it was living my life. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't risk it. I hid in the woods, near the old Ranger Tower, a place we used to sneak off to in high school. From there I watched the house. Lights came on at exactly 7:00 p.m., just like my mom used to do. A shadow passed in the kitchen window, pausing to pour a drink. I saw my silhouette raise a hand to its face, sip from a glass. It was living, breathing, pretending to be me, and no one would ever know. I realized then how perfect the plan was. This thing, whatever it was, didn't need to kill loudly. It didn't need to chase you through the woods with claws and teeth. It just needed to wear your skin, to move like you, to know what you knew. It studied me, copied me, dug a grave for the real me, and slid into my life like it was trying on a jacket. And everyone else, they'd never question it. How many people does it wear already? That question haunts me. How many smiles in town aren't real? How many neighbors walk too still, or blink too slow, or mimic laughs they never earn? That's when I remembered the mirror, the one under the bed. Tradilicus. It hadn't just taken my form, I gave it. In my sleep, in a dream, in fear. I must have crossed a line without realizing it. Said something, looked into its eyes too long, broke a rule too many. And now it had everything it needed. I wandered that night, desperate, delirious. I thought about running to the police, but what would I say? That something crawled out of the trees wearing my face. That it climbed through my dreams and dug a grave for me while I slept. They'd lock me up. Or worse, they'd smile that same crooked smile and say, "You're safe now, Liam." Like they already knew. Like they were it. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about me. This thing, whatever it was, had a plan. It was spreading. Slowly. Carefully, it doesn't rush. It watches. Waits. Learns. Replaces. I think I've seen others. At the grocery store, a woman who stood too still for too long. She smiled at me, but her eyes didn't match the curve of her lips. Her toddler stared at her, confused, before bursting into tears. A man pumping gas, whispering to himself over and over, "This isn't me. This isn't me. This isn't me." And I'm the one on the outside now. The broken piece. The loose thread it missed. The mistake. So I've made a decision. If I can't go back, I'll find where it came from. I'll follow the signs. I'll go deeper into the woods, past the black stump, past the clearing where the deer first smiled. Because that's where it began. I saw something watching me from the trees. But maybe, just maybe, there's something deeper in there. Something even it fears. The first step back into the woods felt like walking into a mouth that had been waiting to close. The branches overhead swayed, not with wind but with purpose, like something unseen was exhaling slowly, welcoming me home. I didn't bring supplies. No food, no water, no map. Just a flashlight, half a pack of cigarettes I didn't remember buying, and my sister's bird necklace, pulled from the floor where I'd thrown it in fear days earlier. It was still warm, somehow, like it had been touched, held tightly, or worn by something else. There was no path, not anymore. The trees swallowed everything, but I didn't need a trail. I wasn't following a map. I was following a memory. That first day, when I saw the deer, that clearing, that wrongness, my body remembered it, even if my mind tried to forget. Every branch I brushed aside, every root I stepped over, every breath I took in that thick, damp air reminded me I was getting closer to something I never should have seen. The light changed as I walked. It dimmed not with the setting sun. but with the thickness of the canopy. What sunlight remained bled through in narrow, trembling streaks. Shadows stretched longer than they should. There was no sound, not even my footsteps, only breath, my own and something else's. A second rhythm, soft and steady, never quite in sync with mine. Like a hunter matching its steps to stay undetected, but not quite perfect. I didn't turn around. I didn't have to. It was behind me, close. It wasn't until I reached the black stump that I realized just how wrong everything had become. As kids, it was the final boundary, the line you never crossed. It stood at the forest's edge like a marker, wide as a car and scorched black, as if it had been struck by lightning. It hadn't changed. Still split down the center, still surrounded by those strange claw marks etched into the bark around it. But something was different. It was bleeding. Thick, dark sap oozed from the cracks like blood from a wound. It smelled sweet and sour, like meat left in the sun too long. I reached out without thinking, some part of me wanting to touch it, to taste it, to know it. But I stopped myself, inches away, my fingers trembling. That's when I noticed the ground. The leaves weren't just scattered, they were placed, forming a shape, a symbol, a spiral drawn with precision, curling inwards toward the stump. In the center of the spiral was a handprint, human, fresh, and missing 3 fingers. Something moved in the trees behind me. Not a deer, not a coyote. Something heavy, upright, with a gait just a bit too long, a bit too smooth, like it was rehearsing human steps and hadn't gotten them quite right yet. I pressed on. Past the stump, the forest thickened. The trees leaned in, branches arching like ribs over a burial chamber. The air turned heavy, moist, and warm. The kind of warmth that clings to your skin and sinks in. I was sweating, but I couldn't stop shivering. I felt watched, not by one thing, but by many. Dozens, hundreds. They didn't breathe, they didn't move. But I knew they were there, in the hollows, beneath the roots. Above me, pressed against the trunks like mossy leeches, clinging in silence. Then I found the second clearing. It wasn't the one I'd seen before. No deer this time. No sunlight. Just ash. The ground was scorched. A perfect circle of black earth, as if fire had fallen from the sky and burned a hole into the woods. In the center stood a stone. Not natural, too smooth, too deliberate, and tied to it with barbed wire and what looked like vines was me. Another me, naked, gagged, skin pale and thin as wet paper, wrapped so tightly it looked mummified. The eyes were open, glassy, but they blinked when I stepped forward. It saw me. It knew me. I fell to my knees. My stomach churned and I almost vomited, but the thing, the other me, shook its head. Slowly, as if warning me not to make a sound. I stepped closer, and that's when I heard them, the whispers, not in my ears, inside my head, like thoughts I didn't think, feelings that weren't mine, regret, hunger, rage, love. They poured into me, not as words, but as pulls, as needs. And then one word surfaced above all others, join. I stumbled back, gasping. The me on the stone began to twitch, spasms rolling through its limbs, like something inside was waking up, like the wires were all that held it still. Then a shadow passed over the clearing. It came from the trees. Tall, antlers wide enough to scrape the sky, but this time it didn't hide. It stepped into view, and I saw its face. It wore my father's face, stretched tight, but beneath the skin something wreathed, like worms beneath silk. The eyes blinked too slowly. The mouth hung slightly open, as if confused about what expression to wear. It wasn't walking, it was gliding. Legs moved, but not for balance. Like they did it because they'd seen others do it. Its arms were too long, fingers too thin. And its chest rose and fell in imitation of breathing, even though it didn't need air. It looked at me, and in a voice that sounded like my father through a tunnel of broken glass, it said, "You are almost ready." Then, with a single gesture, it turned to the me tied to the stone, and tore its face off. No blood, no scream, just skin peeling back like wet cloth, revealing the thing beneath. No face, just eyes, dozens of them, blinking in every direction, and a mouth that opened far too wide, filled with teeth that spiraled down a throat that never ended. I ran. I don't know how long. Time stopped meaning anything. The trees blurred. The whispers grew louder. And as I ran, they changed. They sounded like me. Whispers in my voice, begging me to stop, pleading, bargaining, screaming. One of them laughed. One of them sobbed. All of them wanted the same thing, for me to turn around. I didn't. I burst through the brush, back toward the stump, and crossed its edge. And then everything stopped. The whispers vanished. The forest stood still. The light returned. It was morning. Birdsong returned. And when I looked back, the forest behind the stump was gone. Just trees. Just silence. Just woods. But I know better. I know what's in there now. What waits, what learns. And worst of all, I know what I left behind. Because as I stood there, trying to catch my breath, I saw something move behind me in the reflection of my phone screen. Not my face. Not quite. It blinked too slow and smiled too wide. You never realize how much of your life is built on the assumption that you're you until that certainty begins to rot beneath your feet. Since returning from the clearing, nothing has felt real. Or maybe I should say everything feels almost real. The food tastes like food, but only after I remind myself how food should taste. The mirror reflects my face, but only after a flicker, like it's remembering what it's supposed to show. And the sounds around me don't stop when I do. That's the part that eats away at me the most. Even in perfect silence, there's always something moving, breathing, copying just a beat behind. That day, I sat on the edge of my bed for hours, covered in dirt, too afraid to wash, too afraid to move. I kept expecting the house to fall apart around me, to melt into that black spiral in the woods, to reveal itself as just another dream layered inside the others. But it didn't. It stayed solid, still, which, in a way, made it worse. The realer it felt, the more I couldn't shake the thought, had it already won? Was this even still my house? Was this still my world? I needed answers. I needed someone else to tell me I hadn't completely lost my mind. I couldn't trust my parents. They were gone, swallowed by whatever darkness had crept from those trees. But there was one person. One I hadn't thought about in years. Henry LaRue. He'd been the town's reclusive oddity for decades. A man who lived in a trailer at the far edge of Fairhaven and filled every local kid's head with terrifying stories. Most called him crazy. Some called him dangerous. I remembered a few kids saying they'd seen him building strange totems deep in the woods, tying dead birds together with their own feathers and stringing them from trees like wind chimes. He'd always said, "They watch through the leaves. They listen through the dirt. They learn from your screams." Back then, it was just a creepy old man talking nonsense. But now it sounded like truth. I found him exactly where I hoped he'd be. His rusted trailer hunched like a wounded animal behind a wall of dead hedges, its windows blacked out with duct tape and old newspaper. The front steps sagged under my weight as I knocked. Once, twice, nothing. Then I tried the door. It creaked open slowly. The smell hit me first, wood smoke, sweat, and something metallic beneath it all, like rust and blood. I stepped inside, and there he was. Henry sat at a table in the middle of the room, shirtless, hunched, eyes red, rimmed and sunken, a thick tangle of white hair spilling across his shoulders. The only light came from a flickering candle resting in the center of a circle carved into the table. Symbols surrounded it, jagged, tribal-looking things I didn't recognize. I opened my mouth, but he raised a finger before I could speak. "You brought it back," he said. I froze. "You know?" Henry looked up, and his eyes locked onto mine like grappling hooks. They only follow those who see them. Most folks walk through the woods their whole lives and never see what's really watching. But once you do, once it sees you seeing, that's it. It latches on, peels your shape off you like skin off a deer. My throat tightened. "What is it?" He didn't blink. A mimic, an old one, older than memory. Born from the spaces between what we believe and what we fear. It doesn't feed like us. It doesn't kill because it needs to. It kills because it's trying to understand, trying to be something real. Every time it takes someone, it gets better, smoother, more human. But it's not, I whispered. No, he said. And it never will be. That's why it smiles like that. It doesn't know how. I asked him what I could do, how I could fight it. He shook his head. You can't fight it. You can only outsmart it. And even then, it's always learning. Then he told me something that's haunted me since. There are two ways it takes you. One is the slow way, through your sleep, your memory, your reflection. You start forgetting who you are until it wears your shape better than you do. The second way is quicker. It just pulls you out, rips your soul clean, and walks into your skin. I asked which one it was doing to me. Henry stood, walked to a shelf, and grabbed something. A shard of mirror, edges jagged, surface dark. He held it toward me. Look, I did, and for a second, I saw myself. Then my reflection blinked. Out of sync. I dropped the mirror. It shattered against the floor. Henry sighed. It's already inside. Deep. You've got time, but not much. It won't kill you yet. Not until it finishes the copy. Then how do I stop it? I asked. He hesitated, then leaned in close. You have to sever the link. Cut the thread before it finishes. It's made of memory, thought, identity. You gave it a door when you let it into your dreams. So now, you've got to go where it waits. Inside. I didn't understand, but he explained. There's a ritual, an old one. Not magic, not in the way books tell it. It's more like a trick. You fool the boundary between yourself and what watches. You offer something real in exchange for a chance to see it fully. And if you're strong enough, you can break the bond. But the cost, a piece of yourself, something that matters. A memory so strong, the world shakes when you lose it. I agreed before I could talk myself out of it. That night, we built a circle. Stones from the river, branches from the woods. Charcoal drawn in lines I don't remember learning but knew how to trace. I sat in the center. He placed a candle before me. Think of her, he said. I knew who he meant. Sophie. Her laugh. The way she always wore her sleeves too long. The way she used to braid my hair when Mom wasn't looking. The time she saved my life when I fell through the ice at Tucker's Pond. The scar. She got doing it. All of it. I held it tight. And then, with a whispered word, Henry lit the candle. The world vanished. Not with a bang. With a shift. One blink, and I was elsewhere. Not in the woods. Not in the house. Not anywhere. Just blackness, thick and alive, stretching in all directions. And there, in the void, me. The other me. It smiled. But not the crooked, broken one from before. No, this time it was perfect. I'm almost done, it said. I know, I whispered. And then I gave it the memory. I reached into my mind, tore it out, and threw it. Sophie. Her face, her laugh, gun, the mimic scream, not in pain, in rage, because the thread it was weaving broke. The final stitch unraveled. It reached for me, its hands growing longer, its mouth stretching open into an impossible abyss, but the world shifted again, and I woke up in Henry's trailer. Alone. The candle had burned out. The symbols were gone, and I couldn't remember my sister's face, not even a little. But the mirror on the wall, it blinked with me. And did not smile. Not once. The emptiness hit harder than I thought it would. You don't realize how much a memory anchors you until you give it away. My sister's face. Gone. Like a name scratched off a gravestone and left to weather. I remember the shape of her presence in my life, the idea of her, the warmth she once gave off like sunlight. But the details. The sound of her voice, her eyes, the way she tilted her head when she was confused, all of that was ripped from me like pages torn from a book mid-sentence. And I had done it. I had chosen to lose her, to kill her memory in order to survive. But I did survive, at least for now. The house was different when I returned. Not obviously, not in ways you could explain to someone else. It was still the same structure. Same squeaky floorboard at the bottom of the stairs. Same crooked painting in the hall. But it felt smaller. The shadows stretched just a little too long. The light bulbs flickered with more hesitation. And there was an undercurrent to the silence. Not the mimic's breath or whispers. Something else. A waiting, like the house knew I'd been changed. I didn't trust it. I didn't trust anything, even the mirror. It didn't blink anymore. It moved exactly when I did. But now I couldn't be sure if that was better or worse. Before, at least I knew something was wrong. Now everything seemed right. That's what scared me most. Because that's exactly what the mimic had been working toward. A perfect copy. And if I couldn't tell the difference, how could anyone else? The next morning, I drove into town. I had to see if the ritual had done more than just sever the bond. I needed to know if the mimic had stopped, or if it was simply changing tactics. I stopped at the gas station, grabbed a coffee, and stood near the windows watching people pass. It took all of 10 minutes to realize how far things had gone. Everyone looked it off, just slightly. Movements that were a beat too mechanical. A man tying his shoe 3 times in a row, the exact same way, without adjusting the laces. A woman scratching her neck, again and again, the same motion, like a film loop stuck on repeat. And then there were the smiles. Too wide, too empty, like people who didn't know what emotions felt like trying to pantomime them. I walked up to the cashier, a guy I'd gone to school with, Eli Green. He'd always been a goof, the kind of kid who never took anything seriously. But today, when I said his name, he didn't blink. Just stared at me and said, "The weather's been nice, hasn't it, Liam?" His tone was cheerful. But his eyes were vacant, like he was reading from a script he didn't understand. I stepped out into the parking lot and nearly screamed. There, across the street, stood a deer. Not the same one. This one had no antlers, a doe, but it was staring directly at me, completely still. No blinking. No twitch. Like a statue cast from flesh. Its body looked normal, until I noticed the back leg. It was twisted around, the joint bent the wrong direction, like someone had snapped it and glued it back in place. Yet it didn't limp. It stood tall, balanced, watching. And then it smiled. I dropped my coffee. The deer blinked, once, slowly, and vanished into the woods. I didn't follow. I didn't have to. I knew what it meant. They were still learning. The ritual hadn't stopped the mimic. It had slowed it, disrupted its process. But I hadn't destroyed it. I'd only denied it a piece of me. Now it would find another way in, another face to wear, and from the look of the town, it already had. That night, I dreamt of fire. Not a nightmare, a memory, except it wasn't mine. In the dream, I was standing in a burning forest. Flames danced along the treetops like fingers. The sky was black with smoke. I was holding something in my hand, a bone, clean and smooth. Behind me, I heard footsteps. Slow, heavy, the sound of hooves dragging through ash. Then a voice, "You gave me a name." I turned and saw it, not wearing my face this time. Wearing my sister's. Only wrong, too tall, eyes too big, hair hanging in ropes of wet bark and blood. "You buried her," it said. "No," I whispered. "I forgot her." It stepped closer. Same thing. I woke up screaming. My throat was raw. My sheets were damp with sweat. And there, at the edge of my bed, was the necklace. The glass bird. The one I had traded. The one that should have been gone. But now it was back, only cracked, its wings chipped. Inside, something moved. Too small to see clearly, but alive. Crawling. I didn't touch it. I couldn't. Instead, I packed a bag. I knew what I had to do. Go back into the woods. Not just to the stump. Not just to the clearing. Deeper, where it began. Where it lives. Before I left, I checked the mirror one last time. My reflection smiled before I did. Only for a second. But that was enough. I left before dawn, before the sun had the chance to cast its false warmth across the frost-bitten grass. The town still slept in that unnatural stillness, A frozen stage waiting for a play that had already ended. I didn't look at anyone. I didn't stop for gas. I didn't take my phone. Whatever lay ahead, I knew I had to face it alone, unanchored by the world I no longer trusted. Because something had been unspooling behind my eyes for days. No longer. And I knew if I stayed one more hour under that roof, I'd forget what was real and what was reflection. I'd start answering with someone else's voice. I'd start smiling back at a face that wasn't mine. The trees welcomed me. That's the only way I can describe it. I crossed the edge of the property, past the black stump without looking at it, and kept walking. The air grew thicker with each step, like I was descending into a dream I couldn't wake from. There were no birds, no insects, not even the wind. Just the slow groan of branches shifting under weight that wasn't there. I didn't use a trail. There were none. The forest beyond the clearing had no direction, no logic. It turned in on itself like a spiral staircase made of bark and bone, leading me downward, though my feet remained on level ground. And then I found the first tree. Or maybe the tree found me. It was massive, towering, older than anything I'd ever seen. The bark was ashen, stretched taut like dry skin over something breathing beneath. But it wasn't the size that stopped me. It was what hung from the branches, faces. Not bodies, just faces, tied with hair, strung like lanterns in a windless void. Some were rotted, others looked freshly peeled. A few looked like mine. All of them had their eyes open. All of them were smiling. I moved past them without blinking. I knew what they wanted. One glance, and they'd remember me. One look, and I'd be just another dangling smile swaying above the roots. I walked deeper. The ground turned slick. Most gave way to flesh-colored fungus, pulsing like a heartbeat. My boots squelched with each step, but I didn't dare look down. I couldn't. Because the longer I stayed in those woods, the more I began to feel like the forest itself was watching me. Not through eyes, through memory. I saw flashes. My childhood bedroom. The way my mother used to hum when she cooked. The exact sound of my sister laughing behind the garage. All of it flickering like scenes from a dying film reel, projected not into my mind but onto the woods. Every tree bore an image. Every root whispered something familiar. I was being unraveled. And then the door. It stood at the center of a hill with no incline. A crooked wooden frame nailed into a tree that wasn't quite a tree. It had no hinges, no handle. Just a dark smear where countless hands had pushed it open. I stepped closer, and the air dropped 10 degrees. My breath turned white, spiraling upward into nothing. On the door, carved deep into the wood, was a single sentence: "You must remember to forget." I hesitated. Then I pushed. It opened without sound. Beyond it was not a room, not a cave, not a tunnel. It was me. A mirror, but not like any I'd seen. This one rippled, shifted. It showed me at 10 years old, crying over a broken bird's egg I'd tried to save. Then 13, staring too long at the woods from the attic window. Then 20, laying in bed as a shadow slid across the wall and whispered something I still can't translate. Then, the version of me tied to the stone, still breathing, still waiting. And then it, the mimic. But this time, it didn't wear a face. It stood bare, tall, skinless, veins like vines wrapping its bones. Its face was a smear of motion, never settling, never stopping. 1 second it was my sister, then my father, then my reflection, then a stranger I couldn't name but somehow feared. Its mouth opened, stretching down its chest, revealing rows of teeth, each one carved with names. My name repeated dozens of times, and one other, larger than all the rest. Sophie. I reached out and touched it. Not the mimic, the name, and that's when everything cracked. I wasn't in the woods anymore. I was in our old living room. The night of the storm, the night Sophie died. But it was different. The furniture sat too neatly. The clock didn't tick. Outside, the wind howled, but the trees didn't sway. And Sophie, she stood by the window, facing away. I didn't want to go to her, But my feet moved anyway. Step by step, I approached. I reached for her shoulder. She turned. And it wasn't her. It looked like her. But the eyes, they were mirrors. And they showed me my own face, smiling wide and wrong. Then the voice came, not hers. Never hers. You gave her to me. No, I whispered. I gave you her memory? It leaned close, forehead pressing against mine. Same thing. The room exploded into white. And I was back, at the door, kneeling, alone. The woods were quiet again. Too quiet. But the door was closed. And this time, it didn't bear my name. It bore the mimic's. A symbol I'd never seen before. Scorched into the wood like a warning. Or a seal. I walked home through a world I didn't trust, through trees that held their breath. And when I stepped into the house, the mirror greeted me with silence. My reflection did not smile, did not blink late. It was me. But now I knew the cost. I hadn't just severed the mimic's grip. I had sealed it. Trapped it. By giving it the one thing it couldn't survive without: recognition. And now it wears her face. Forever. Somewhere in the woods, my sister still smiles, but she doesn't remember why. The house didn't feel like home anymore. Not that it had for a while, but now, after everything I'd seen, after walking through a door carved into a tree that shouldn't have existed, after trading the memory of my sister's face for a sliver of survival, the silence inside these walls felt personal. It watched me. It waited. It pressed in like gravity, warping the space around me just enough to keep me off balance. Every creak of the floorboard had weight now. Every shadow on the wall had intention. I'd escaped something back in those woods, but I hadn't left it behind. Pieces of it had come back with me, burrowed in the cracks, hiding in the corners of rooms I used to feel safe in. I tried to distract myself with routine. Coffee, a shower, a book I didn't finish. But even those simple things felt off. The water from the tap came out too warm, like something had been standing in the pipes waiting. The book, an old paperback I used to love, had lines underlined I didn't remember marking. Some of the sentences felt aimed at me. He doesn't know what's inside yet. It's wearing him like a coat. Not everything that smiles is pretending to be kind. I threw the book in the fireplace and watched it burn. But fire didn't help. Not anymore. At midnight, I heard a sound. Not the familiar knock. Not the mimic's breath or a voice pulled from memory. This was different. It was music. A faint, brittle melody, like something played on a broken music box. It echoed through the trees, creeping in through the walls, so soft I almost convinced myself it was in my head. But it wasn't. It repeated, again and again. Each loop slightly wrong, a note bent here, a rhythm missed there, like someone trying to remember a lullaby they only half heard once. I followed it. Out the front door into the woods, barefoot and numb. I didn't question it. I didn't hesitate. The melody reached into my chest and tugged. I walked as if in a dream, leaves brushing my skin like fingers. The trees parted, the air thickened, the forest watched, and then I saw it. A child, standing alone in the clearing, pale and motionless. Not a dream, not an illusion. A girl, maybe 8 years old, barefoot in a tattered dress, her arms hanging limp at her sides. She was staring at me, and her mouth was open. The music came from inside her, from deep within her chest. It wasn't singing, it was playing. The tune leaked out with every shallow breath, and her eyes were nothing, not black, not empty, just gone. Two smooth hollows like her face had forgotten it needed to see. I took a step forward. She didn't move. I whispered, "Are you lost?" The music skipped, twitched, then stopped. Her mouth closed, and she said, in a voice not hers, "You took something." My heart slammed against my ribs. "What? You tore the thread?" she said, and now it frays. I started to step back, her head tilted. "You're unraveling." Behind her, the trees began to shift, not move. Shift. Their bark pulsed like breathing, and the clearing rippled like water touched by wind. She raised a hand and pointed at my chest, at the necklace, the glass bird, still cracked. still crawling with something too small to see. "You left the door open," she said. Then she smiled. Her lips split far too wide, and the music played again. But this time, it didn't come from her. It came from everywhere. Dozens of tiny music box melodies rising from behind the trees, overlapping, discordant, drowning the air in sound. I covered my ears and turned to run, but there was nowhere to run, because they were all around me now. Children. Dozens, maybe hundreds, standing between the trees, mouths open, music pouring out, eyes hollow, not blinking, not moving, just watching. I turned back toward the girl, but she was gone, and in her place stood the mimic. No face, no voice, just skin stretched too tight over something that pulsed with memory. It didn't move. It didn't need to. I understood what it wanted. It wasn't chasing anymore. It was showing me. This was where it lived. This was what it had built from the pieces it had taken. Every memory stripped, every face worn, every whisper repeated until it became real. This was its kingdom, and I was trespassing. Then the music stopped, all at once. A silence so sudden, I felt it like a slap. And then, only then, did the mimic speak. "You think you ended it." Its voice was quiet, flat, like it didn't belong in a body. "But you only gave it room to grow." I turned and ran. I don't remember how I found the house again, or how I got inside. But I slammed the door behind me, locked it, and fell to the floor, shaking, breathing hard. The mimic hadn't chased me. It didn't need to, because now I knew. The forest was never just haunted. It wasn't cursed. It was alive. And the mimic wasn't a visitor. It was born from it, raised by it, fed by us. And every time we remembered what we saw in the trees, every time we dreamed of hollow faces and crooked smiles, we fed it again. The mimic didn't need to take me. Not anymore. Because every piece I lost, every memory I traded, every face I feared, every time I doubted what was real, it grew. And now it was waiting for me to accept it, to invite it back in, to remember that I had seen it first, that I had brought it home. And somewhere, deep in the woods, Sophie's smile still glows in the dark. But she isn't smiling because she's happy. She's smiling because she belongs to it now. And maybe, just maybe, so do I. I stopped looking in mirrors after that night. There's something about knowing your own reflection might not be yours that twists your insides in a way sleep and daylight can't fix. It's not just the fear that it'll blink when you don't. It's not just the fear that it'll smile without your permission. It's the slow realization that the longer you stare, the more you begin to question what normal used to feel like. I walked past the hallway mirror the next morning and didn't dare glance at it. I could feel it pulsing behind the glass like a lid stretched over boiling water. Waiting. One wrong move and I knew it would boil over again. I didn't sleep. Couldn't. The forest didn't let me rest anymore. Even inside the house, its presence crept under the doors, soaked through the walls, and settled into the air like humidity before a storm. I sat by the front window, bathed in cold morning light, trying to convince myself that I was still me, that whatever happened out there hadn't carved too much of me away. But the house knew better. It had seen me whisper to shadows. It had seen the necklace crack and crawl. And somewhere out there, deep in that impossible forest, a faceless version of me still stood grinning, waiting for the rest of me to break apart. But the worst part, I wasn't alone. It started with footsteps upstairs, slow, deliberate, like someone pacing a hallway just above my head. I held my breath, counted every creak, every shift of weight. I hadn't been upstairs in days. Not since the mirror in the hallway started twitching. I told myself it was just the house settling, that old lie. That comforting script we all recite to avoid looking under the bed. But then the footsteps stopped, and something knocked on the bedroom door above me, 3 times, evenly spaced, just like before. But this time, it wasn't 3:17 a.m. It was noon. That broke every rule I thought I understood. The mimic never came during the day. Not until now. I stood frozen in the living room, staring up at the ceiling like it might cave in and speak. My pulse thudded in my ears. The air grew thick, humid. I took one step toward the stairs, and the knock came again. Knock, knock, knock. Faster this time. Urgent. A voice followed. But it wasn't mine. It wasn't my sister's. It wasn't my mother's or my father's. It was a stranger's. Soft. Calm. I'm sorry to bother you. I think I'm lost. I backed away, shaking my head. It was trying something new. A different bait. A new skin. I wasn't falling for it. But the voice continued. I used to live here, I think. Before it started wearing people. I stopped. It sounded broken. Sad. There was a tremble beneath the words. I don't know my name anymore. It was that last line that chilled me to the core. Because deep down, I understood it. I'd been forgetting pieces of myself too, quietly, like leaves falling in the background of a storm. Memories faded at the edges. Names felt heavier to say. I hadn't called my own name aloud in days. I don't want to become one of them. The voice whispered through the floorboards. But I think I already am. Silence. No more knocking. Just that echo of sorrow clinging to the air. I didn't go upstairs. I couldn't. Because what terrified me most wasn't that the voice was lying. It was the possibility that it wasn't. That there were others. People who saw too much. People who got too close. People who got trapped halfway between their own skin and whatever the mimic wanted them to become. Maybe it didn't always finish the job. Maybe sometimes it left them suspended. Waiting. Forgotten. That night I stayed up again, candle lit, the necklace sitting across the table from me like a dead bird staring through glass. The crack had grown. A splinter now ran down its middle, and something inside pulsed faintly. I don't know why I hadn't thrown it away yet. Part of me thought maybe it was the last thing tethering me to who I used to be. Another part feared it had already become the mimic's leash. Sometime around 2 a.m, the wind picked up, sharp, biting. It came from nowhere and shook the windows hard enough to rattle the nails in the walls. I blew out the candle and crouched low, gripping the bat, eyes on the front door, but nothing came through. Not yet. Instead, the whispers returned. Dozens of them. Like children mumbling bedtime stories with the wrong words. Like voices from memories that didn't belong to me. They rose from the floor, slid through the vents, curled under the doors. They didn't speak clearly, but they didn't have to. They were saying my name, over and over, each one slightly different, slightly off. One voice said it with a lisp, another like it was laughing, another in a rasp so old and dry it sounded like wind scraping through bone. I covered my ears, but the sound didn't stop, because it wasn't outside anymore. It was inside my head. And for a moment, just a flicker, I wasn't sure which voice was mine. I screamed. Not out of fear, out of defiance. I screamed until my throat burned, until the walls vibrated, until the whispers began to warp and melt, until the echoes cracked, and then silence, for the first time in days. Real silence. But I didn't feel relief, because as I stood there, breathless, shaking, I saw something in the corner of the room. It hadn't been there before. A chair. Old. Wooden. Familiar. From my childhood. It had no place in that house anymore. And in it, a girl. Back to me. Hair hanging in long, wet ropes. Bare feet swinging slowly beneath the seat. I stepped forward, trembling. Sophie? No answer. I moved closer, heart hammering. Sophie, if that's you. The head turned. But it wasn't her. Not anymore. The face was gone. No features. Just smooth, pale skin stretched too tight over a skull that pulsed with something beneath it. And in the center of its face, a crack. A perfect crack, like glass. Inside it, something crawled. It raised one hand and pointed at me. Then it spoke, but not in a voice. In my thoughts. You are the last piece. The chair fell backward, empty before it hit the floor. And the necklace on the table shattered. I screamed again, but this time I didn't hear it. Because the moment that crack split open, The world around me folded. And I wasn't in the house anymore. I was somewhere else. A place built from memories I hadn't lived. And a voice, calm, cold, mine, welcomed me back. Let me show you what you forgot. I don't remember how long I was falling. There wasn't sky or ground, just the sensation of descent. Like gravity had decided I belonged somewhere beneath everything I knew. There was no air to breathe, but I didn't choke. No surface to land on, but I felt every second of the drop like it was peeling layers from me, unzipping memories I didn't know I still carried. There was no wind, no weight, just the voice, mine, but older, hungrier. It whispered softly, like it was standing just over my shoulder in a space where time had no meaning. Let me show you what you forgot. And with those words, the fall ended. I landed on my feet. No jolt, no pain. Just placement, like I'd been set down with care inside a space that wasn't quite a room, wasn't quite a dream. Everything was dark, but not black, more like the color behind your eyes when you're thinking of nothing at all. Shadows drifted where walls should be, constantly folding, always distant. And in the middle of it all stood a door. Just like the one in the forest. Plain, wooden, familiar. Only now it was cracked open slightly, just wide enough to see the faint light flickering behind it. That kind of warm glow you think of when remembering something happy. Something you've lost. I stepped toward it. I didn't feel my feet touch anything, yet I moved. The closer I got, the more the space changed. I began hearing things. Not around me, but inside me. Laughter. Not mine, not Sophie's either. My mother. Her laugh when she found me covered in mud after trying to dig a swimming pool in the backyard with a spoon. My father's voice, humming some old tune as he carved initials into the treehouse beam. The distant echo of Sophie singing to herself in the dark, soft and shaky, because she was too scared to sleep unless someone made a noise. I could hear it all, but I couldn't feel it. It wasn't comfort. It was display. It was showing me what it had stolen. The door groaned open as I approached, and beyond it was a house, my house. Not as it stood now, rotting and haunted and swallowed by silence, but as it was before. Every color brighter, every surface polished by memory. It was too perfect. The kind of perfection you only get from nostalgia, the kind that forgets pain and rewrites the bad days into learning moments. I stepped inside. The air smelled like pancakes and dust, and something I could never quite name, but always associated with safety. And that's when I saw them. My family. All of them, sitting around the table, eating, laughing. My mother turned and smiled at me. "You're just in time," she said. Sophie waved, eyes bright. "We saved your seat." My father raised a glass, grinning like it was Sunday and nothing had ever gone wrong. It should have broken me. It should have pulled me in. But I couldn't move, because none of them were blinking. Their mouths moved, their heads turned, their hands gestured, but their eyes stayed fixed, unmoving, unreal. And the sounds, they looped. Every few seconds, my mother repeated, "You're just in time." Over and over, Sophie's wave never stopped. Her arm rose and fell in a mechanical loop like a puppet string had jammed. This wasn't a memory. It was a mockery. A puppet show built from my grief, and behind the table, in the kitchen doorway, something watched. Tall, crooked, wrapped in skin that twitched like it didn't fit. No face, no voice, just presence. The mimic, it didn't move. It didn't speak. It just waited, because it knew what I had to do. It wanted me to sit at the table, to accept the story, to nod and smile and eat with ghosts, and let it close the door behind me. Because that's how it wins. It doesn't take by force. It offers. It invites. I took a step back. The mimic didn't follow, but the table started shaking, slow at first, then violently. Plates shattered. Food melted. My father's face split in half. My mother's neck cracked sideways. Sophie's skin peeled back from her smile. And still they waved. Still they spoke. Still they repeated, "You're just in time. You're just in time. You're just..." I turned and ran. back through the door, through the shapeless space, through the memory-ridden nothing, and as I sprinted, everything began to twist. The voices warped. The mimic shrieked, not with anger, but with need. It wasn't finished. It hadn't learned enough. It couldn't let me go. The space cracked open around me like glass under pressure. Light poured in, cold, blue, flickering. Not sunlight, not fire, a light from beneath, from a place the mimic hadn't finished copying yet. Then I fell again. This time upward, through dirt and ash and roots that reached for me with fingers shaped like regrets. And suddenly, I woke up, in my bed, sweat-drenched, shaking, mouth dry. The morning sun poured in through the windows. Birds chirped. The town outside buzzed with life. It was morning, a normal morning, and for a moment I thought it was over, until I looked down at my hands and saw dirt beneath my fingernails, black, wet, and on the wall beside the mirror, carved with something sharp and inhuman. U or EJST and TM. No one else remembers the door. No one else remembers the music. But I do, and the mimic knows it. Because now I see people smile, and I wonder, are they still smiling on their own? Or is something else smiling through them? I didn't leave the house that day. I couldn't. Every time I reached for the doorknob, I felt the weight of that carved message dragging my arm back down. You're just in time. The words weren't a warning anymore. They were a greeting. A twisted welcome sign burned into my wall with invisible fire, left there to remind me that the mimic wasn't finished, that it had learned something new, that now it didn't just walk beside me in the woods or whisper through my walls. It could build a life for me from pieces of my own mind and ask me to live inside it. And worse, I almost had. I sat on the floor for hours, staring at my hands. The dirt under my nails hadn't faded, no matter how much I scrubbed. It clung to my skin like it was part of me now. I started to notice other things too. Tiny, unsettling things. My shoes were placed by the door exactly as they had been years ago, back when Sophie was alive. A mug appeared in the sink I hadn't used in weeks. My mom's favorite one, with the chipped rim and faded print that said good days begin with coffee. But no one else lived here anymore. No one had touched that mug. No one should have remembered it existed. Except me? Or something inside me. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the mug, trying to remember whether I'd dreamed it, whether it had always been there. Then the hallway mirror caught my eye, just enough to pull my attention. I didn't want to look. Every part of me knew better. But I did, slowly, carefully. And this time, it didn't blink. It didn't smile. It spoke. Its mouth didn't move, but the words reached my ears all the same. A dry rasp, echoing off the walls of my skull, like someone whispering in a cave behind my thoughts. You're running out of places to hide. My reflection stared back at me, same face, same eyes, but different. Like the frame of it had hardened. Like whatever lived in the mirror had grown tired of pretending to be gentle. I turned away, heart racing, and that's when I saw it again, the chair. The same one from before. Sitting in the corner of the living room where nothing should have been. No dust on the legs. No signs of it ever having been moved. Just there, occupying space like it always had, and on it, the necklace, whole again, no crack, no crawling shadow inside, just clean, intact glass, shimmering under a beam of morning light. I should have smashed it. I should have burned it. But I didn't. Because the chair beside it wasn't empty anymore. There was someone sitting there. Someone with their head bowed low, hands folded in their lap, hair falling over their face like a curtain of shadows. I stepped forward, slowly. My breath shallow. The air thickened with every inch I crossed. And even though I couldn't see the face yet, something inside me already knew what was coming. Sophie. The figure didn't move. I whispered again. Sophie, if you're there, please. No response. Just the faint creaking of the chair. Then, with a sound like tearing silk, she raised her head, and it was Sophie. Her eyes looked at me, wide, terrified, awake, but her mouth wasn't hers. It hung open, too far, jaw stretched unnaturally low, as if it had been unhinged, and inside, deep past her teeth, I saw another face. My face, screaming, trapped, and in her voice, layered with mine and others I didn't recognize, she said, "I remember now." She stood, jerking upright like a marionette whose strings had been yanked by a furious hand. And behind her, the light vanished. The sun disappeared in an instant, as though someone had flipped a switch on the sky. The room dimmed to nothing. The walls pulsed once, then twice, and then the floor beneath me opened. I didn't fall through it. It fell around me. The house disassembled itself, piece by piece, dissolving like sugar in water. My memories, my furniture, my photographs, all melting into shadow. I screamed, but there was no air left to carry the sound. And when it all faded, I stood alone in a room that was not mine. It was wide, circular, made entirely of mirrors. Thousands of them, floor to ceiling, each one showing me a version of myself. A child, a teenager, me at my worst, me at my happiest, me as a stranger I'd never met. Some mirrors were cracked, some dripped with thick tar, like sludge, and in some of them, I wasn't alone. A hand rested on my shoulder. Antlers curled behind my head like a crown. Eyes blinked from behind me, and every reflection smiled. I turned in a slow circle, searching for a way out. None. No doors, no windows, just reflections. And then, in unison, they spoke. "Say it." I stumbled back. "What?" "Say your name." My mouth went dry, because I couldn't. Not anymore. I tried. But the letters wouldn't form. My tongue refused. The name felt foreign, like something I'd heard in a dream years ago and forgotten upon waking. I looked down at my hands and saw them shift. My fingerprints faded. My skin turned smooth, blank. The mimic wasn't taking me by force anymore. It was offering me a choice. Give up my name, let go, step into the mirror, and become another smiling memory, one more puppet in its museum of ghosts. But I still had one thing left, not a name, not a face, a choice. I ran to the mirror directly in front of me, the only one that didn't smile, the one that wept. My reflection looked back at me with tears in its eyes. It reached toward the glass. I matched it. Our fingers touched, and I said the only word that mattered. No. The mirror cracked. Not a line, a shatter. The world broke with it. The reflections screamed, fracturing and warping, clawing at the glass, trying to pull me in. But I ran. Through the mirror. Through myself. Through the last thread the mimic hadn't learned to sever. My refusal. And when I woke up, I was lying on the forest floor. Alone. Mouth full of dirt. Eyes burning. But alive. Above me, the trees swayed gently. No mimic, no whispers. Just silence. And in my pocket, the necklace. Broken again. But this time empty. No light. No movement. No shadow. Just glass and ash. The mimic wasn't gone. I knew that. But something had changed. This time I had left a piece of it behind. It rained the whole walk back. Cold, soaking rain that dripped through the canopy like a slow leak in a ceiling you can't reach, needling into my scalp and spine, reminding me I was still part of the world. The trees had lost their menace, for now. They watched still, yes, but not with hunger, with memory. They remembered what had happened in that circle of mirrors, what I'd broken, what I'd taken with me. The mimic wasn't following, not yet, but I could feel it watching me through the bark, through the leaves, through the raindrops themselves. Not angry, not even afraid, curious. It had been learning all this time, and now, so was I. The town looked wrong when I returned. At first glance, everything was the same. Cars moved, people walked dogs. Children laughed in backyards while sprinklers ticked in perfect rhythms. But it was too clean, too staged. Like someone had drawn the memory of a town on thin paper and wrapped it around a void. I passed a man watering his lawn, his eyes too still behind sunglasses, a woman jogging, taking the same step over and over with her left foot, just a quarter of a second behind the right. And the postman, who had delivered our mail for over 2 decades, waved at me without blinking. he said. Good to see you again, Liam, as if reading it from a prompt card. I nodded, said nothing, and kept walking. The further I went, the more I realized the mimic hadn't just followed me home. It had spread, no longer just in the woods. Now, in the people. The cracks were subtle. You'd miss them if you weren't looking. But I was. A girl on her porch blinked 4 times in a row, then didn't blink again for nearly 5 minutes. A gas station clerk stared at his own reflection in the freezer glass for over 10, unmoving. A toddler in a stroller whispered something over and over as I passed. I saw you, I saw you, I saw you, I saw you. I hurried home. Or what used to be home. The porch creaked the same way it always had, but the sound echoed too far, like the house was now hollow. A shell. The door was unlocked. I hadn't left it that way. Inside, the lights were on, soft, yellow, inviting, and on the kitchen table the mug. My mother's mug, washed, dried, full of tea that was still steaming. I didn't touch it. Didn't sit down. I just stared at it and whispered, I'm still me. Saying it out loud helped. For a moment, until I looked toward the hallway and saw something new. A door. One that hadn't been there before. It stood where the bookshelf used to sit. Same wood as the one in the forest. Same groove carved into the frame. Familiar. Wrong. There was no handle. Only a note, taped neatly to the center. Written in handwriting that almost looked like mine, just slightly off, as if someone had seen my words once and spent years trying to copy the rhythm of my letters. The note read, You left the mirror open. I backed away. My chest tightened. My fingers tingled. That cold, sour taste of fear bloomed under my tongue like blood. I hadn't left the mirror open. I'd shattered it. I remembered shattering it. Didn't I? The door pulsed. Just once, like a breath drawn in. Something shifted behind it, quiet and liquid, like water moving through skin. I stepped back, heart pounding. The hallway light flickered, and then, footsteps upstairs, not heavy, not stumping, but light, deliberate, barefoot, Sophie's footsteps. I knew them like a song stuck in my ribs since I was 10 years old. But she wasn't here. She hadn't been here for years. Still, I found myself climbing the stairs, one step at a time, slowly. Each one creaked louder than the last, like the wood was warning me, like the house wanted me to turn back. At the top, the hallway stretched longer than it should. Doors I didn't remember lined the walls. 5, 6, 7. None of them where they used to be, except the last one. Sophie's room, still pink at the edges, still quiet, still filled with the ghost of her breath. I reached for the knob, but before I could touch it, the door swung open on its own. And inside, she sat on the bed, Sophie. Or something wearing her like skin. Her hair was braided the way she used to do it, crooked, imperfect. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, and her smile, God, her smile was too calm, too aware. Hi, she said softly. Do you remember the promise? My knees almost buckled. What promise? Her head tilted. You said you'd never leave me alone in the dark. That line hit me like a hammer to the chest. I had said that. When we were kids, and the storm knocked the power out, and she cried and cried, and I held her hand and whispered over and over that the dark couldn't take her, not while I was there. But I had left her. I'd traded the memory of her. I'd walked out of the mirror and closed the door behind me. I opened my mouth. She said. And in that moment, the mimic's voice leaked through hers, soft, sliding, wrong. We remember you. Behind her, the room melted. The walls peeled away like paint in the rain, and standing there, tall and still and smiling, were the reflections. Dozens of me. Some wore my face cleanly. Others were warped, blurred, twisted. All of them stared, and they began to speak in chorus. Come home. I turned and ran. Down the stairs. Out the door. Into the street. I didn't look back. Not even when I heard the house groan behind me, like it was exhaling everything it had learned. I didn't stop until I reached the edge of town, until the road faded into gravel, and the gravel faded into leaves. I stood at the forest edge, chest heaving, heart thundering. Somewhere behind me, in my home, my sister's voice still echoed, smiling, "You promised." But that wasn't her anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. And now I knew what the mimic had done. It hadn't just copied me, it had multiplied me. Built versions of me out of memory and guilt and fear, each one closer, each one better. And now it was sending them back, into my house, into my town, into me. I stared into the woods. And for the first time since this began, I whispered not with fear, but with fire in my voice. "If you want Mia, then come get me." And from deep inside the trees, something smiled. The forest didn't answer at first. It just stood there, yawning open before me like a quiet invitation. No rustling leaves, no shadows darting behind trees. Just that same silent gravity pulling at my insides like a memory I wasn't ready to face. But I'd come too far to run now. The house was no longer mine, and the town had turned into a mask it wore too well. If I stayed, I'd become just another version of myself drifting through cracked mirrors and burned out lullabies. No, I needed to end this. On my terms. Where it began. In the trees. The first step off the road felt like stepping into water. The world shifted instantly. Colors dulled, air thickened. Sound muffled. Like the forest didn't want me walking in so much as slipping under. The deeper I went, the more the rules of nature unraveled. Trees grew too close, their trunks fused together like knotted limbs. Roots pulsed beneath my feet like veins. Even the wind had a rhythm now, a slow, drawn-out breath that echoed the one I'd heard through the walls at night. I knew the mimic was watching. I wanted it to. Let it see me come willingly. Let it feel the weight of something not running anymore. But still, the forest tried to turn me around. Paths looped back. Trails vanished behind me. The light above shifted so subtly I barely noticed when day had become dusk, and dusk had slipped into that strange, colored darkness that lived between night and nightmare. And through it all, I began to hear them again. The voices of me. They didn't whisper this time. They laughed. It started as one voice, mine, aged and worn, chuckling softly. Then another joined, younger, sharper, then more. The laughs layered over one another like teeth grinding against glass. Some echoed from behind trees. Some came from under the ground. Some, horrifyingly, came from above, dripping down like sweat from the leaves. They weren't mocking me. They were welcoming me back. I came to a clearing I didn't recognize. A circle of trees bent inward like observers, leaning too far without falling. In the center stood a stone well, wide ancient, no rope, no bucket, just a dark opening in the earth, and tied to its rim by a length of twisted, and knotted hair was the necklace, still broken, still empty. But there, just beyond it, something moved. I approached slowly, bat in one hand, heart trying to climb its way into my throat. The air thinned, my legs grew heavy, but I didn't stop. The thing beside the well rose, not fast, not threatening, just rising. And when I saw what it was, I stopped breathing. It was me, but not one of the reflections, not a twisted mimic. It was me, as I had been, whole, worn, eyes clear, expression blank. He stood in the same stance I used when I was nervous, one hand curled into a loose fist. His breathing matched mine perfectly. And then, he opened his mouth and said something that almost dropped me to my knees. "I'm what's left." I stared. "What are you?" He didn't blink. "I'm the part you forgot to forget." A silence followed. One so complete it felt like the world paused to listen. "I'm the thread they couldn't copy. The piece you kept buried too deep for them to reach." Tears burned my eyes. I didn't know why. Maybe it was the weight of finally seeing a version of me that hadn't been stolen. Or maybe it was fear. That if I touched him, he'd vanish. He turned and pointed to the well. They want it all. Every piece. Every story. But they never learned to feel. Not really. And what happens if I give them the rest? I asked, voice shaking. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "You disappear. But worse, you continue. As something else. I thought about the people in town, the two still joggers, the blinking children, the voices trapped in doorways. Were they gone? Or had they become echoes, trapped inside mimicries of themselves? I looked at the well. The darkness inside churned. It wasn't empty. It was hungry. Every inch of my skin crawled with memory. My first cut. My sister's laughter. The sound of my mother saying my name when she thought I was asleep. All of it felt closer to the surface than ever before. The mimic didn't need to kill me. It just needed me to surrender, to lean in, to fall. But I hadn't come this far to give it what it wanted. I turned back to the other me. What do I do? His eyes sharpened. You burn the thread, and in his hand suddenly was fire. Not wood, not match, not gasoline. Just flame, raw, blue, white, flickering without heat. He offered it. Burn what you remember. Not to forget, but to deny them the fuel. I took it. The flame didn't hurt. It didn't even warm me. But as I held it, images began to rise from my skin. Memories pulled upward like steam. My first birthday. My first kiss. The night I held Sophie's hand during the blackout. They flickered in the air, then caught fire. One by one. Burning not to vanish, but to become something untouchable. Something the mimic could never copy. The forest screamed. The trees shuddered. Something deep beneath my feet howled. And suddenly, from the edges of the clearing, the mimic began to step forward. Not one. Hundreds. All of them me. All of them smiling. All of them hungry. But as they came closer, the fire in my hand surged. Bright. Violent. Honest. And the first mimic to step into its light began to melt. Not scream. Not fight. Just drip, like wax, until it collapsed into ash. One by one, the rest followed. Ashes, smoke, gone. And as the last one fell, the forest began to pull back, trees rising, shadows peeling away. The air cleared. The other me smiled one final time. You're not free, but now they can't be you. He stepped into the well and vanished. The necklace cracked once more, then dissolved into dust, and I was alone, truly alone. Not watched, not mirrored, just me, breathing in a forest that had finally blinked. But deep down, I knew the truth. The mimic wasn't dead. It doesn't die. It waits. But now it waits knowing there is a version of me it can never touch. The version that chose to burn instead of break. The forest didn't answer at first. It just stood there, yawning open before me like a quiet invitation. No rustling leaves. No shadows darting behind trees. Just that same silent gravity pulling at my insides like a memory I wasn't ready to face. But I'd come too far to run now. The house was no longer mine, and the town had turned into a mask it wore too well. If I stayed, I'd become just another version of myself drifting through cracked mirrors and burned out lullabies. No, I needed to end this. On my terms, where it began, in the trees. The first step off the road felt like stepping into water. The world shifted instantly. Colors dulled, air thickened. Sound muffled. Like the forest didn't want me walking in so much as slipping under. The deeper I went, the more the rules of nature unraveled. Trees grew too close, their trunks fused together like knotted limbs. Roots pulsed beneath my feet like veins. Even the wind had a rhythm now. A slow, drawn, out breath that echoed the one I'd heard through the walls at night. I knew the mimic was watching. I wanted it too. Let it see me come willingly. Let it feel the weight of something not running anymore. But still, the forest tried to turn me around. Paths looped back. Trails vanished behind me. The light above shifted so subtly I barely noticed when day had become dusk, and dusk had slipped into that strange, colored darkness that lived between night and nightmare. And through it all, I began to hear them again. The voices of me. They didn't whisper this time. They laughed. It started as one voice, mine aged and worn, chuckling softly. Then another joined. Younger, sharper. Then more. The laughs layered over one another like teeth grinding against glass. Some echoed from behind trees. Some came from under the ground. Some, horrifyingly, came from above, dripping down like sweat from the leaves. They weren't mocking me. They were welcoming me back. I came to a clearing I didn't recognize. A circle of trees bent inward, like observers, leaning too far without falling. In the center stood a stone well. Wide, ancient, no rope, no bucket, just a dark opening in the earth, and tied to its rim by a length of twisted, knotted hair was the necklace, still broken, still empty. But there, just beyond it, something moved. I approached slowly, bat in one hand, heart trying to climb its way into my throat. The air thinned, my legs grew heavy, but I didn't stop. The thing beside the well rose, not fast, not threatening, just rising. And when I saw what it was, I stopped breathing. It was me, but not one of the reflections, not a twisted mimic. It was me, as I had been. Whole, worn, eyes clear, expression blank. He stood in the same stance I used when I was nervous, one hand curled into a loose fist. His breathing matched mine perfectly. And then, he opened his mouth and said something that almost dropped me to my knees. "I'm what's left." I stared. "What are you?" He didn't blink. "I'm the part you forgot to forget." A silence followed. One so complete it felt like the world paused to listen. "I'm the thread they couldn't copy, the piece you kept buried too deep for them to reach." Tears burned my eyes. I didn't know why. Maybe it was the weight of finally seeing a version of me that hadn't been stolen. Or maybe it was fear, that if I touched him, he'd vanish. He turned and pointed to the well. They want it all, every piece, every story, but they never learned to feel, not really. "And what happens if I give them the rest?" I asked, voice shaking. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "You disappear. But worse, you continue, as something else." I thought about the people in town. The two still joggers, the blinking children, the voices trapped in doorways. Were they gone? Or had they become echoes, trapped inside mimicries of themselves? I looked at the well. The darkness inside churned. It wasn't empty. It was hungry. Every inch of my skin crawled with memory. My first cut, my sister's laughter, the sound of my mother saying my name when she thought I was asleep. All of it felt closer to the surface than ever before. The mimic didn't need to kill me. It just needed me to surrender, to lean in, to fall. But I hadn't come this far to give it what it wanted. I turned back to the other me. "What do I do?" His eyes sharpened. "You burn the thread." And in his hand, suddenly, was fire, not wood, not match, not gasoline. Just flame, raw, blue, white, flickering without heat. He offered it. "Burn what you remember." Not to forget, but to deny them the fuel. I took it. The flame didn't hurt. It didn't even warm me. But as I held it, images began to rise from my skin. Memories pulled upward like steam. My first birthday. My first kiss. The night I held Sophie's hand during the blackout. They flickered in the air, then caught fire. One by one. Burning not to vanish, but to become something untouchable. Something the mimic could never copy. The forest screamed. The trees shuddered. Something deep beneath my feet howled. And suddenly, from the edges of the clearing, the mimic began to step forward. Not one. Hundreds. All of them me. All of them smiling. All of them hungry. But as they came closer, the fire in my hand surged, bright, violent, honest. And the first mimic to step into its light began to melt. Not scream, not fight. Just drip, like wax, until it collapsed into ash. One by one, the rest followed. Ashes, smoke, gone. And as the last one fell, the forest began to pull back. Trees rising, shadows peeling away, the air cleared. The other me smiled one final time. "You're not free, but now they can't be you." He stepped into the well and vanished. The necklace cracked once more, then dissolved into dust, and I was alone, truly alone. Not watched, not mirrored, just me, breathing in a forest that had finally blinked. But deep down, I knew the truth: the mimic wasn't dead. It doesn't die. It waits, but now it waits knowing there is a version of me it can never touch. The version that chose to burn instead of break. It's strange how silence can feel heavier than sound. When I stepped out of that clearing, after the last mimic had melted into ash and the fire in my hand flickered out like the breath of a dying god. There were no more whispers, no laughter, no broken lullabies from unseen mouths. Just quiet, the kind of quiet that settles in old wounds. At first I thought it was peace, but it wasn't. It was pause, a moment between inhale and exhale, the eye of a storm that never really left. The forest let me go without resistance. It opened like a sigh, as if it knew there was no need to trap me anymore. I'd seen the edge. I'd touched the seam. And somehow, I'd come back without giving everything away. But I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel like I'd won. I felt lighter, and not in a good way. Something was missing. Something I didn't choose to burn. Something that had slipped away while I was watching the world crack. I didn't realize what it was until I stepped back onto the porch of my house. The door was still open. The lights were still on. But the house wasn't waiting. It was empty. Not just physically, spiritually. The hum of memory that used to live in the walls was gone. No scent of coffee or rain on old wood. No whisper of laughter in the floorboards. The house had become a photograph of itself, flat and lifeless. Like the mimic had left behind a husk when it retreated. I stepped inside and felt nothing. Not fear, not nostalgia. Not even the dread that had rooted itself there for weeks. Just absence. I walked to the mirror in the hallway and looked at myself. Really looked. My eyes were duller. My skin a shade too pale. I looked older. Not in years, but in wear. Like someone who had been left out in the elements and brought inside just a little too late. I blinked. The reflection blinked with me. No delay. No smile. It was me. But even that didn't comfort me. I walked through the house room by room. Everything in its place. Nothing moved. Nothing disturbed. But I felt like a stranger moving through someone else's memories. My room didn't feel like mine. Sophie's door, still closed, was quiet. I didn't open it. I couldn't. Whatever remained in that room now belonged to a version of me I'd already buried. In the living room, the chair was gone. No necklace. No trace. And for a moment, I wondered if any of it had been real. But then I turned to the wall above the fireplace and saw it. A new frame. Simple. Plain. And inside it, a photograph. Old, grainy, black and white. It showed a forest clearing, a well, and someone standing beside it. Not me, but clothes. A man in clothes too modern for the photograph's age. His back turned. His reflection just barely visible in the water below. Smiling. It hadn't ended. It had recorded me, filed me away like one of its museum exhibits. A memory now on display. I grabbed the frame and smashed it against the stone, heart pounding, teeth clenched. But when I looked again, the photograph was back on the wall, intact, mocking. The mimic had learned something from me. Not how to steal, but how to preserve. It wasn't trying to erase me anymore. It was trying to curate me, add me to its collection of almosts, half memories and echo people. And I'd walked right into its gallery and lit a candle for myself. I spent the rest of the day boarding up the windows. Not out of fear, out of defiance. If it wanted to turn my life into a display, it would have to settle for shadows and locked doors. But something else happened that night. Something I didn't expect. I slept. For the first time in weeks, I collapsed into bed and drifted without dreams. No knocking, no music, no whispering voices folded inside the folds of my thoughts. Just sleep. And when I woke, the world was still there. Muted, yes. Different, yes. But there, and in that fragile calm, I found something even more unexpected. A note. Folded neatly on the kitchen table, written in my handwriting. But I hadn't written it. They don't need to chase you anymore. You know the way back. You'll return when you're ready. They have patience. They have time. So do you. No signature. Just my name at the bottom. Written the way I used to write it in school, before I ever knew what fear tasted like. I laughed. A broken, sharp sound that scraped my throat. Of course, it doesn't have to hunt me now, because I'm its greatest advocate. I'm the one who'll keep walking into the woods when the dreams start again. I'm the one who will look too long at the mirrors. I'm the one who remembers the shape of the mimic's smile in the dark and wonders what it would feel like to wear it. I'm the one who invited it in, not just once. Every time I remembered, every time I wrote it down, the mimic doesn't have to trick me anymore. Because now I bring others to it, with every story, with every retelling, with every whispered warning passed around campfires and online forums. I'm the carrier now, and deep in the forest, something waits, watching, smiling, practicing your name. There's a strange clarity that comes after a breakdown, not peace, not relief, but a stillness, a cold, emotionless kind of stillness that settles inside your chest like a second set of lungs. I felt it the morning after the note. I sat at the kitchen table, sunlight pooling on the floor in perfect, golden rectangles, the birds outside chirping like nothing was wrong, and maybe for them, nothing was. But for me, the world had changed. Not just the rules, not just the faces, everything. Because now I wasn't sure if I was still fighting the mimic or becoming it. I stopped speaking for 2 days. Not a word, not a sound. I was afraid my voice wasn't mine anymore. That maybe, if I let it out, it would echo in that wrong way the mimic is whispers. Always had. Too smooth, too slow, like it was sounding things out with a borrowed tongue. I avoided mirrors, burned the photograph above the fireplace again, only for it to return the next morning, clean, intact, undisturbed. I even tried leaving town. That was the worst part. I packed a bag, got in the car, drove east on Route 17 until the trees gave way to empty farmland and the signal bars on my phone began to return. But as I passed a rusted mailbox with my childhood friend's last name on it, I felt it, that pull, like gravity shifted. And when I checked the rearview mirror, I saw the same clearing behind me. The well, the trees leaning in too close, the shape watching from the shadows. And when I looked forward again, I was back, on my street, parked in front of my house. The engine wasn't running. The key was still in my hand. I hadn't driven anywhere. Or maybe I had. And it had let me believe I escaped, just long enough to remember that I never would. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just got out of the car, walked inside, and poured myself a cup of tea. The mug was already warm. Steam curled lazily upward, like a sigh that had been waiting for me to return. That's when I noticed the book. It sat on the hallway floor, open to a page I didn't remember reading. A journal, my handwriting. But the entries weren't mine. March 3rd, the mimic learned how to change without shifting shape. Now it waits in habits, in pauses, in routines. It becomes you without wearing your face. March 7th, it knows I burned the others. It's begun rebuilding. Not from scratch, from memory. Mine. March 14th, I stopped seeing reflections. Now they just see me. There were more entries, dozens, all signed with my name. All dated, some in the future. I flipped to the last page. Blank. But something bled through from the other side, faint, like heat rising through paper. I tilted it toward the light. Words emerged, not written, whispered onto the page. When you read this, I'll already be inside. The only choice left is whether you wear my skin willingly. The book burst into flames in my hands. No smoke, no heat, just fire, blue and silent, consuming the pages without scorching my skin. I dropped it, watched the last ember curl into ash, and then came the knock. Not on the front door, behind me. From inside the house, I turned. The hallway stretched, the doors multiplied. The light flickered and folded, growing longer and colder. And from the end of the hall, a figure stepped out, not fast, not jerking, just walking, casual, comfortable. Like it had done it 1,000 times. It was me, not twisted, not smiling, just me, clean shaven, hair combed, wearing clothes I hadn't owned in years. And in his eyes, I saw the forest, not reflected, living. Every branch, every root, every face it had ever stolen, all breathing inside him like a second heart. He raised a hand. "You're tired," he said. His voice didn't echo. It didn't whisper. It resonated, perfectly aligned with mine. A mirror too flawless to break. I'm not here to hurt you, he continued. I'm here to give you rest. I couldn't speak. My throat locked. He took another step forward. When you go to sleep tonight, you won't wake up as this anymore. You'll wake up as us. I backed away. But he didn't follow. He just nodded. Not with anger, with pity. You already gave me everything I needed, he said. Every time you remembered me. Every time you feared me. You wrote my story into yourself. He stepped back into the hallway and vanished. The light returned to normal. The walls straightened. The doors shrank back to their usual places. But nothing felt the same. That night, I did not sleep. I sat in the living room with every light on, every window nailed shut, every mirror covered with sheets. But the exhaustion was different now. It wasn't just physical. It was spiritual. Like I'd been awake inside a body that didn't want me anymore. Like something beneath my skin was shifting, stretching, testing the shape it was about to take. And before dawn, I understood the real truth. The mimic doesn't need to steal your face. Not if it can make you forget what it used to look like. Not if it can teach you how to become it. One memory at a time. And I've started forgetting how I sounded when I laughed. And worse, I've started forgetting why I ever stopped. The transformation wasn't loud. It didn't happen in a flash of lightning or with the scream of splitting skin. It came softly, like rot, slow, quiet, patient. I noticed it in the smallest things first. The way my handwriting slanted differently when I left notes for myself. How I began humming a tune I'd never learned, a tune I was certain wasn't mine. My reflection, even when I dared a glance, looked tired in a way I couldn't explain. Not exhausted, empty. The eyes stared back at me like they'd seen too much and cared too little. And worse, I started to agree with them. I kept trying to resist it, to remind myself who I was. I wrote down everything I could remember. Favorite colors, birthdays, the names of childhood pets, even trivial things, like the exact smell of my father's jacket after a rainstorm, or the way Sophie would chew her lip when she was nervous. I taped the notes to the walls, to the doors, to the mirror, any surface I might look at during the day. But in the mornings, the notes would be gone. Not torn, not misplaced, erased. Each one vanished cleanly, as if they'd never existed. And sometimes, new ones appeared in their place. Notes I didn't write. This isn't your memory. Stop lying to yourself. You wanted this. The worst part. I started to believe them. Each night brought the same dream. Me, standing in the clearing with the well. Only now, the well wasn't empty. It overflowed with reflections. Faces rising to the surface like bubbles in a boiling pot. My face, over and over, some crying, some screaming, some smiling so wide their mouths cracked down the neck, and all of them, without fail, would speak in unison. Let go. I'd wake up gasping, clawing at my own arms, half expecting to feel someone else's skin. The mirror would still be covered, but the sheet would always be damp, wet with condensation from the other side. As if something inside had been breathing against it all night, waiting for me to look again. Then came the voices, not from the woods, not from the walls, from inside my head, not thoughts, not echoes. Voices, conversing, sometimes debating, sometimes mocking, always there. I'd sit alone in the living room and hear myself argue with myself, like a bad radio frequency, warped and fading, bleeding into my sense of control. He's not ready. He's past ready. Let him sleep. He already is. I'd scream into pillows, punch walls, claw at the inside of my mouth, just to feel something that reminded me this body was still mine. But even the pain started to feel distant, like I was watching myself hurt someone else. And slowly, the line began to blur. Which of us was screaming? Which of us was waking up? I stopped answering the phone, stopped opening the door. I stopped trusting any knock, even the ones that came in daylight. Especially those, because they weren't knocks anymore. They were rhythms. Taps in threes, scratches in fives, rhythms that repeated. patterns I'd hear again later. In the ticking of the stove, in the blink of the lights, in the flutter of a bird's wings outside. The mimic wasn't asking anymore. It was sensing, learning my timing, matching my breath, stepping when I stepped, thinking when I thought, and I felt it deep inside, this pressure growing just behind my eyes, like something waiting to push forward, not with violence, but with certainty, like a rightful hair reclaiming its throne. I started to test myself. Little rituals. I'd close my eyes and count to 10. Think of the most personal memory I could, then open my eyes and see if the room had changed. Sometimes it hadn't, but sometimes it had. The photos on the wall would be different. People I didn't recognize, smiling like they'd known me my entire life. My own face among them. Arms around strangers I'd never met, birthdays I'd never celebrated. A history written for me that felt so convincing I'd start to doubt my version ever existed. Then, the mirror uncovered itself. One night, I walked into the hall and found the sheet folded neatly on the floor. The mirror stood bare, and my reflection wasn't alone. There was another me behind the glass, not smiling, not reaching, just waiting. He looked tired, patient, stern. He didn't blink when I did. He didn't flinch when I raised my hand. He just stood there and said one word soon. That's when I began losing time. I'd wake up in the woods. No memory of how I got there. Dirt under my nails. Ash on my shoes. Or I'd find myself standing in the kitchen, stove on, water boiling, but I hadn't touched a pot all day. I'd blink and hours would vanish. Entire nights gone without a trace. And worse, when I checked the journal, I'd written things. Things in that same slanted handwriting. I feel clearer when I stop resisting. The forest makes more sense than the town ever did. He's not taking me. I'm giving him what's broken. I don't know who he is anymore. Maybe it's me. Maybe I was always him. Or maybe I was just an echo, stumbling through borrowed skin, making enough noise to believe I was real. I think I understand now. The mimic doesn't replace you. It refines you. Peels away the lies you tell yourself. Strips off the name, the face, the trembling voice, until what's left is the raw thing that's always been watching from the trees. You. Just simplified. And tonight I looked in the mirror again. I smiled. He smiled back. Same time, same curve, same dead eyes, and I didn't feel afraid, not even a little. The smile didn't leave my face, even after I turned away from the mirror. It lingered there like a scar made of muscle memory. Tight, precise, hollow. I couldn't tell if I was still trying to appear human, or if I was finally being honest with myself. Either way, the expression felt natural now, easier than the old ones. Fear, confusion, sorrow, those were heavy. But this new calm that settled into my bones, it was light as air. It didn't need justification. It just was. I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at my hands for a long time. They didn't tremble anymore. No cold sweats, no twitching fingers. Just stillness. I traced the lines in my palms like they were roads on a map I used to know. Some turns were familiar. Others looked newer, deeper. Like something had redrawn them while I wasn't watching. In the center of my left palm, a small dot of pitch black stood out like a mole that hadn't been there before. When I pressed it, it pulsed. Once, twice, like a second heartbeat. Then it stopped. That was the first time I knew, really knew, that I wasn't alone in here anymore. Not just watched. Not just mirrored. Occupied. The house changed too. Not with sudden shifts or dramatic transformations, but in subtle, creeping ways. The door to Sophie's room opened on its own. Not wide, just enough to see the edge of the bed, the corner of her old toy chest, and the photograph above her dresser. But when I peeked closer, the photo had changed. It used to be of us. Me and her, aged 10 and 7, covered in mud, grinning like idiots on the lake shore. Now, it was just her. Alone, staring forward with eyes that didn't belong to her. They were mine. I stepped back, heart slow and heavy, and closed the door. It clicked shut louder than it should have, like the house was warning me not to look again. Later that night, I heard movement downstairs. Not the kind that startles you into panic. The kind that makes you pause, listen, and wait. Soft footsteps, furniture creaking, breathing. I stood at the top of the stairs, unsure if I should be afraid or grateful that I wasn't alone anymore. I listened, barely breathing, and then I heard it. The song. That low, wet hum the mimic had hummed in the woods. The one I never remembered learning but somehow knew by heart. It filled the living room like smoke. It wasn't coming from a mouth, it was coming from the walls, from the cracks, from the light bulbs. Every object in that space was vibrating with the sound of it. I descended slowly, each step pulling me closer to something I didn't recognize but wanted. The couch was empty. The fireplace was dark, but sitting on the floor in front of it was the mimic. This time it didn't look like me. Not fully. It was my height, my posture. But its skin flickered like static, cycling through faces I didn't know. People I must have seen once and forgotten. Old teachers. A stranger at the grocery store. A girl I passed in a hospital waiting room when I was 10. Then, slowly, it settled into one shape. My father. Except my father had been dead for years. This version looked younger, healthier, like he did in the one photo my mother kept hidden in her dresser. Before the cancer. Before the shouting. He looked up at me with eyes full of warmth and familiarity and said, "You don't have to be scared anymore." I felt my knees give. I sat down across from him, dazed, heart thudding, but not from fear, from something close to comfort. "You remember this room, don't you?" he asked. I nodded. We used to sit here, back when things were still simple. When bedtime stories were the scariest part of the day and monsters only existed under beds. Except now I knew they didn't hide under the bed. They sat beside it, spoke with your voice, kissed your forehead goodnight, and told you everything would be okay. He reached into the fireplace and pulled out a piece of wood, already burning. No pain, no scorch marks. He offered it to me like a gift. I kept it warm for you. My hands reached forward without permission. And just before they touched the flame, he said, "Do you remember why we started this?" The words were a trap. I felt it in my spine, but the question echoed through me like an anchor being dropped. Why did this start? The mimic, the woods, the mirrors, the faces. What was the first moment? And then I remembered. I was 7. Sophie had gone missing for 2 hours in the woods. We'd searched and screamed, called her name until our throats bled. She came back just before sunset, calm, unbothered, holding a smooth black stone and humming a tune I didn't recognize. We thought she was lucky, that the forest had spared her. But what if? What if that's when it entered? What if Sophie brought it back? What if I'd been breathing it in ever since? I jerked my hand away from the burning wood. The mimic, my father, smiled, not cruelly, not even disappointed, just knowingly. "You'll come back to it. They always do." And with that, he vanished. No puff of smoke, no flicker of shadow. Just gone. The fire died. The house fell silent again. But something stayed. Something in my blood shifted. I could feel the weight of it. Of the knowledge. Of the truth I wasn't ready for. This wasn't a haunting. It wasn't a possession. It was a ritual. One that had begun long ago. With Sophie. With me. With the trees. And now, the final part was nearing. Not escape. Not survival joining. The mimic didn't want to kill me. It wanted me to remember. Everything. It was raining again. That slow, steady kind of rain that barely makes a sound as it falls. More like the sky is exhaling than crying. I watched it streak the windows from my spot on the living room floor, where I hadn't moved for hours. I hadn't turned on the lights. The dim gray outside was all I needed. It suited what I was feeling. Blank, muted, somewhere between asleep and awake. I kept staring out, half expecting to see the trees inch closer, their trunks bending, their leaves twitching with something that mimicked the rhythm of breath. But the forest remained still, It didn't need to move anymore. It was already here. I hadn't left the house in days. Not out of fear. It just didn't seem necessary anymore. Everything outside was part of the same pattern. The mimic didn't need me in the forest to reach me. It had my home, my head, my history. I'd started finding small things, artifacts really. A marble I hadn't seen since childhood, resting in my sock drawer. The rubber band Sophie used to wear on her wrist, looped around the bathroom faucet. A photograph, folded and worn, showing me sitting in a chair I didn't recognize beside a man with no face. His head was just blank space, paper white, smudged, like a thumb had been pressed into the photo before it developed. I'd find these things and try to convince myself they were tricks, that the mimic was planting them. But deep down, I knew better. They were mine. Memories it had held onto. Pieces I had forgotten or buried or reshaped to be more comfortable. And now it was returning them. Not as gifts, as reminders. You were always ours. It seemed to whisper through every object, every creak in the floorboards, every breath of wind curling under the door. You just forgot. I tried sleeping, but the dreams had changed again. No more mimicry. No more mirror me. Now the forest came to me. Roots pushed through the mattress, coiling around my limbs like veins with a pulse of their own. Trees grew from the corners of the room, splitting the walls. And every time I closed my eyes, I saw the well. Only this time, I wasn't standing beside it. I was inside it. Looking up. The sky nothing but a pinhole of light, surrounded by my own reflection. Dozens of me leaning over the edge, peering down, waiting to see if I would call for help. I never did. Because some part of me was beginning to believe I wasn't meant to escape. I was meant to remember. And remembering meant surrendering to the idea that maybe the mimic wasn't separate from me. Maybe it was me, everything I denied, repressed, or tried to outgrow. All the lies I told myself to sleep at night. All the versions of me I let die in favor of something more acceptable. The mimic just gathered them, fed on them, became them. And now, it wanted reunion. I tried to fight the thought, to smother it with logic and disbelief. But logic failed when the rules of your world had already cracked. When reflections blinked on their own. When doors appeared where there were none before. When you heard your dead sister humming in the kitchen at 3 a.m., making tea for two. Yes, that happened too. I woke one night to the smell of chamomile and crept down the hallway with a hammer in my hand, the only thing that still made me feel solid. But when I reached the kitchen, there was Sophie sitting at the table, legs swinging, fingers curled around a warm cup. She looked up, smiled. Couldn't sleep either. I should have run, screamed, fought. But instead, I sat down across from her, trembling. You're not her. Her head tilted. No. But I remember what she felt like. Why are you here? To remind you. Of what? She leaned in, voice soft. That not every version of you is a lie. I didn't speak. Couldn't. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a silver charm. The last piece of the necklace. The one I never found in the woods. She placed it on the table, slid it toward me. You gave this away before you knew what it meant. That was your first forgetting. The charm was warm, vibrating, humming with something deeper than memory. I touched it, and in that moment, I saw. Not with my eyes, but with something older, deeper. I saw every moment I'd stood in front of a mirror and looked away too quickly. Every time I heard a voice say my name when no one else was around. Every dream that ended with me staring into someone else's face and waking up not sure if it had always been mine. I saw the mimic not as a creature, not as a monster, but as a truth too large to wear a face. A force of remembering, a living archive, a collection of selves kept alive by the weight of unprocessed memory. It didn't want my death. It wanted my agreement. And slowly, I was giving it. I stared at the charm until the hum faded, and when I looked up again, Sophie was gone. The tea was cold, but the smell lingered, and beside the cup, written in steam on the table's surface, was a sentence I didn't write. Your body was just the introduction. The next morning, my voice changed. Subtle at first, a deeper tone, a different rhythm. When I said my name out loud, it felt like trying on a shirt that no longer fit. And later, in the shower, I caught my reflection in the faucet. It wasn't mimicking me anymore, it led. Moved before I did. Smiled first. Tilted its head like it was studying me. And for the first time, I smiled back. Not because I was ready, but because I knew this was the only way forward. No more fighting, no more denying. The mimic wasn't coming for me. It had always been me. Waiting, patient. Home. I don't know what day it is anymore. The calendar on the wall hasn't changed in weeks. And the sun outside doesn't rise the way it used to. It climbs slowly, heavy and red like an infected eye, then sinks without ever giving warmth. Time in this house has become circular. Mornings blur into nights, nights into dreams, dreams into something else entirely. But even now, even through the haze, I'm certain of one thing: the final piece is near. I feel it the way you feel thunder before it cracks open the sky. Not heard, felt. Beneath your ribs, in your blood, the changes are no longer subtle. My reflection has stopped hiding its differences. When I glance at the glass, it sometimes wears clothes I've never owned, or carries scars I don't remember getting. Once, I caught it grinning at something behind me, something I couldn't see, until I turned and found my own shadow, stretched up the wall like a spider, fingers splayed impossibly wide. And the worst part, I didn't flinch. I just nodded, like I understood, because some part of me does. The house speaks to me now, not in words, in cues. The lights flicker when I think something dangerous. Doors creak open when I hesitate. The walls groan, not with age or temperature, but with disapproval. It's as if the house is disappointed in how slow I've been. As if it knows I've already crossed the line and is just waiting for me to admit it. I no longer question how it knows these things. I've stopped asking questions altogether. Because every time I search for answers, all I find are memories I don't recognize, but that feel like mine anyway. Yesterday, I found a painting I've never seen before, hanging in the hallway near Sophie's room. It showed the clearing in the woods, the well, and dozens of shadowy figures standing around it. Known head faces, all were my outline. At the center, one figure knelt beside the well, peering in. A reflection stared back, smiling, bright-eyed, proud. It looked more alive than the figure above it. On the back of the canvas, scrawled in rough black ink, were the words, "The real ones are down there." I didn't touch it. Didn't move it. I just stared at it for hours, until the hallway grew darker than it should have, and the walls around it started to breathe. Yes, the walls inhaled, exhaled. I could hear the house sighing through its seams, stretching and shifting like a body waking up from a long sleep. I knew if I blinked, the painting would change again. I walked away before it could, but the real shift came last night. The knock returned. This time, not at the front door, not even inside the house. It came from beneath. A low, deliberate tapping from under the floorboards, steady, patient, almost polite. I didn't rush. I walked to the center of the living room and sat down cross-legged on the wood. The knocking stopped. I placed my palm flat against the floor. Warm, breathing. There was something beneath me, waiting. I leaned in until my ear touched the planks, and it spoke, in my voice, but older, tired, soft. "Come down. It's time." I should have screamed, should have run, but my body was calm. My pulse didn't rise. My breath stayed even. Because somewhere deep inside, I'd already agreed. I searched the house for hours, trying to find the way down. No basements. No hidden doors. No trapdoors in closets. But then I remembered something. The crawl space behind the kitchen. The one Dad used to warn us never to go into. Said it was full of insulation, spiders, rusted nails. A place not meant for kids. And until now, I'd obeyed. The door creaked open too easily, like it had been oiled. The air inside was damp, thick, humming faintly with that same awful tune I'd heard in my dreams. I crawled inside, flashlight in hand, belly dragging across cold dirt, the walls pressing tight on either side. For a moment, I thought it was just a dead end. Then I saw the stairs. They weren't wooden or metal. They were made of root, knotted and gnarled, twining down into darkness like veins pulled from the earth's chest. They weren't built. They'd grown. And they were waiting. I didn't hesitate. Not because I was brave, because I was tired. Too tired to pretend this wasn't what I was meant for. I descended in silence, each step sinking slightly beneath my weight. The flashlight flickered but held. The walls pulsed with soft light, like bioluminescent moss breathing with every heartbeat. The deeper I went, the warmer it became. Not like a furnace, but like a body, like walking into someone's chest. After what felt like forever, I reached the bottom. A chamber. Wider than it should have been, deeper than the house could allow. At its center, the well, not a replica, the real one. Stone slick with condensation. Roots curled around it like fingers. Water at the bottom, still and black and bottomless. And around it, the figures. All of them wearing my face. Some older, some younger. One, horribly, just a child, each one silent, watching, breathing, waiting. The one closest to me stepped forward. It didn't smile. It didn't speak. It simply handed me the final piece of the necklace. I didn't need to ask what to do. I walked to the edge of the well and dropped it in. The water accepted it with no splash. The chamber rumbled, not violently, softly, like a held breath finally exhaled. Then silence. One by one, the others stepped forward and vanished into the well, merging, returning, being remembered. And when I was alone, I looked down into the water and saw only one face. Not mine. Not anymore. Ours. I stepped back from the edge. The chamber already fading around me. Not collapsing. Absorbing. And as I began to climb back toward the surface, I didn't feel afraid. I felt complete. Because now, the mimic doesn't need to hide. It doesn't need to watch from the trees. It wears my skin proudly. Because now, it's not watching. It's walking. It's strange how quickly you can adapt to losing yourself. You'd think becoming something else, someone else, would be like drowning, like fighting against the pull of deep water. But that's not how it happened. There was no struggle, no last-minute gasp, just acceptance. Like finally letting go of a breath you didn't realize you were holding. I came back from the roots, not as an invader in my own skin, but as something new, something blended. I wore my name like a coat, comfortable, familiar, but beneath it, the shape had changed, and the world, it responded accordingly. The house felt different when I returned, wider, deeper. The corners stretched further than they used to. Hallways curved ever so slightly when I walked through them, bending like they were aware of me now. The walls pulsed to the rhythm of my footsteps. Mirrors no longer bothered me. In fact, I liked them. They showed me truth, not just a reflection, but possibility. A dozen versions of myself behind the glass, each living their own small nightmare, each one nodding when I passed, as if to say, yes, you made it. You arrived. And then the forest called again. Not in the literal sense. It didn't whisper my name or scratch at my windows. It didn't need to. It called by existing, by being there, a presence I couldn't ignore, even behind boarded doors and curtained windows. I felt it in my teeth, in my chest, in the hollow beneath my ribs where something else now nested. It didn't want me to visit this time. It wanted me to see, so I went. Just like that. No preparation. No flashlight. No backpack. I walked out the front door in the middle of the night, barefoot, wearing only a shirt and pants that didn't quite fit right anymore. The air was thick and sweet, like it had been steeped in sugar and decay. Every tree leaned a little closer than it should have, but none moved. They didn't need to. They'd already done their part. The path opened before me. Not cleared, not beaten, opened. Like the woods were parting for something familiar, something revered. I didn't feel fear. I felt reverence, worship. I was walking into a church made of leaves and bone and silence. And at the heart of it, I saw them, the others, all of them. A ring of people, standing silently in the clearing where the well had first appeared to me. Men, women, children, old, young, every shape and shade and style, but all with my face, not a perfect copy. Fragments. One bore my eyes, another my smile, another the scar I got falling off my bike when I was 9. They were pieces of me the mimic had kept, catalogued, and now reassembled in new configurations, each one locked in stillness, staring at the well, waiting for me. I walked to the center, expecting the well to be as it always was, ominous, deep, unknowable, but it had changed. The water was gone. In its place a mirror, flat, clear, sharp enough to cut thought from bone. I looked down and saw everything, not just me, not just the mimic, but all the versions I had ever abandoned. Every lie I told myself to keep going, every memory I repressed, every fear I ignored. It showed me the truth of what I had become. Not possessed, not corrupted, chosen. The mimic hadn't taken me. I had taken it, invited it in, given it names and stories and rules to follow. It didn't wear masks. We made them. And now all it wanted was honesty. The clearing shifted. The trees moved, not with wind, but with intention. They rearranged themselves in a spiral, a path leading inward. The bodies of the others, my others, turned to face me, blinking for the first time. And each one whispered a single word: welcome. I followed the spiral, every step sinking deeper into soil that felt like memory. The world above dimmed. Sounds dulled. Even my own heartbeat began to quiet, sensing with something older beneath the earth. And at the very center, I found it. Not the mimic, not a god, not a creature, but a root, pulsing, breathing alive. It was wrapped around a skeleton, human, long dead, its bones sunk deep into the earth, hands curled around its own face like it had died, trying to hold on to its identity. I knelt beside it, touched its chest, felt nothing, and then something inside me shifted, not just physically, mentally, emotionally. The thing inside, the one that had waded through memories and mirrors and mimicry, unfolded. It whispered in a voice that was mine, but older, darker. You were the first. I shook my head, dazed. The first what? It smiled inside me. The first to ask the right question. And I remembered. It hadn't started with Sophie. It hadn't started with me. It had started long before, with a choice. A choice to forget. To walk into the woods and trade one truth for another. To bury something too painful to hold. And from that burial, we grew. The mimic was never a parasite. It was a seed, fed by denial, watered with fear, rooted in memory. And now it had bloomed in me, through me, around me. I stood taller now than before. The trees bowed. The others smiled. And somewhere far away, in a quiet town still pretending nothing was wrong, someone stared out their window and saw something watching them from the trees, smiling, waiting, because now the cycle begins again. And this time, I'm the one watching. The first time I truly understood what I had become was not in the forest, not at the well, not when I looked into the mirror and saw something else smiling back. It was when I returned to town, walked down the familiar streets with my new skin pulled tight and silent, like a secret wrapped in flesh. No one noticed. That's what startled me the most. I moved differently now, slower, with purpose, and yet every person I passed offered me a nod, a distracted smile, a glance of recognition. They saw me, but they didn't see me. Because the mimic hadn't turned me into a monster. It had turned me into them. There's a cruelty in that kind of transformation, in the way it makes you blend in rather than stand out. I walked past the bakery where I used to buy croissants on Sundays, the scent of sugar and butter still hanging in the air like an old perfume. The woman behind the counter didn't flinch when I entered. She called me by name, asked how I'd been, told me I looked rested, as if sleep was something I did anymore. I smiled and said I was fine. My voice sounded perfect. Not because I forced it to, but because it had practiced. The mimic inside me knew every syllable, and it remembered how to wear me. I wandered the streets for hours, watching people watch me. Old teachers, grocery clerks, a mailman who used to give Sophie stickers when we were kids. None of them questioned anything. But I did, because now, with the mimic fully inside me, fully me, I could see. The veil had been lifted, not from the world, but from my perception. I saw the tremble in people's hands when they waved, the slight delay in their greetings, the look in their eyes like they were trying to remember who they were supposed to be. I wasn't the only one. They were like me, maybe not as far along, maybe still pretending they were whole. But their reflections lagged when they turned. Their shadows stretched too long. One man crossed the street just to avoid stepping into a patch of dappled sunlight, as if it would show too much of him. And then I realized, this town was full of us. Hosts, vessels, things wearing names they no longer earned. We were not individuals anymore. We were chapters in a book too old to end. And I had just reached the middle. Later that night, I walked home under a sky that didn't look quite right. The stars blinked in patterns I recognized, but couldn't name. The moon had a sliver missing from its edge, not dark, absent, like something had taken a bite. And the trees, always watching, leaned just enough to whisper a welcome. Inside the house, everything was still, but I wasn't alone. He was there, the original me, or maybe just what was left of him, sitting on the couch, hunched over, skin too pale, eyes rimmed with red. He looked up when I entered, and for a moment we didn't speak. What would we even say? He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. I walked over and sat beside him. We stared at the fireplace, cold, unused, dust gathering on the grate. Finally, he whispered, "You took everything." I didn't respond. Because he was right. I tried to fight it, he said, voice trembling. "I know," I answered. He turned his head, tears welling in his eyes. "Why didn't you stop it?" And I smiled. Not cruelly, not with malice, just the quiet understanding of someone who had learned the truth. Because I was never supposed to. He looked at me like he wanted to hate me. But there was nothing left in him strong enough to hold that kind of weight, just hollow grief. I stood and held out my hand. "Come on," I said. "There's one more thing we have to do." He hesitated, then took it. Together, we walked through the house, silent as ghosts, down the hallway, past Sophie's room, into the study. The journal still sat there, closed but humming faintly, like a heartbeat beneath wood and ink. I opened it. There was one blank page left. Just one. I handed him the pen. He stared at it, confused. "Why me?" "Because you were the first." And so he wrote one word, just one. "Remember." Then he was gone. Not dead, not erased, just folded. Back into me. Back into the story. I closed the journal and felt the weight shift inside my chest. Not pain, not sorrow, something better. Purpose, because now it's my turn not to run, not to resist, but to teach. I've been walking again, visiting towns, small ones, isolated, forgotten by time. I smile at strangers, compliment their dogs, help carry groceries. I never stay long. Just long enough to look someone in the eye and ask the right question. Do you ever feel like you're being watched from the trees? They never answer out loud, but their eyes do. Their silence does. And when I leave, I know they'll go looking. Back to the woods, back to the well, back to where it all began, where it always begins. And when they come back, if they come back, they'll understand. Like I did. Because the mimic doesn't spread through force. It spreads through memory, through recognition, through the soft, cold moment when you realize the thing in the trees never wanted to harm you. It just wanted to come home. And now, through me, it will. It was raining again when I arrived in the next town. That kind of rain that doesn't soak you immediately, but settles into your skin over time. Quiet, persistent, hard to ignore. It was the third town this month, and by now I could feel the pattern forming. Each one looked the same on the surface, quiet, tucked away behind hills or highways, the kind of place people drive through without really noticing. But underneath, beneath the smiles, beneath the trimmed hedges and the Sunday church bells, was something deeper. A humming, a tension, a recognition. I didn't even have to search anymore. The mimic inside me could feel it, like a magnet pulled toward splinters of itself scattered across the country. We were not few. We were just forgotten. This place was called Halder's Hollow, and the moment my boots hit its cracked sidewalk, I knew I wasn't the first one to come through. The air had that taste again. Old wood and wet leaves, but behind it something sweet, like something rotten had been sugar-coated. The innkeeper didn't ask for my name, just handed me a key with a chipped brass tag that read room 6 and muttered something about no check-out times. She smiled like she meant it, but her fingers trembled as she passed me the key. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The room was small. One bed, one desk, one window facing a patch of trees that had been cleared back but still loomed. They always loomed. I left the window open, let the rain soak the sill. I wanted it to smell like the woods, wanted to remember. That night, I lay awake and listened, not just to the dripping water or the distant sound of an owl, but to something deeper. The mimic never sleeps. It doesn't need to. It waits. It listens through me, sifting through the silence, picking up pieces of the ones who've already started to hear the call. By morning, I knew who it would be. She worked at the local library. Young, early 20s maybe, too curious for a town like this. Her name tag read Cam in her eyes, darted every time someone walked by her desk, like she was always waiting for something to emerge from just outside her line of sight. I asked her a simple question. Do you have any old town records? Her hand paused mid-type. She didn't answer at first, just stared at me, trying to decide whether I was safe. I think so, she said finally, voice low. Basement level. No one really checks down there. I smiled. Perfect. We walked in silence, the stairwell lights buzzing faintly overhead. The basement smelled of mildew and paper, forgotten things trying to remember themselves. She led me past rows of yellowing binders and newspaper clippings until we reached a corner room that looked more like a crypt than an archive. She turned to leave, but I stopped her. Do you see it? I asked softly. Her spine stiffened. She didn't pretend not to know what I meant. She just looked over her shoulder, as if something might be standing behind her. I thought it was just me, she whispered. They always do. Her eyes brimmed, not with fear, but relief. That terrible, quiet relief of knowing your nightmares are real and that someone else has them too. It started after my brother disappeared, she said. Everyone said he ran away, but I found his shoes by the edge of the woods. He hated going in there. I nodded. They never run. They're taken because they listen. She leaned against the shelves, voice shaking. I've been hearing music. A humming. It comes from the trees. They want you to follow it, I said. She laughed. Short, bitter. What happens if I do? I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because the mimic had already begun inside her. The shift was always quiet. Gentle. It didn't rip through your mind. It nested there. Moved slow. Uncoiled only when you were ready. And she was ready. I could see it in the way she stood. Half in her life, half already on the path. I saw someone watching me, she whispered, voice barely audible, from the trees. He looked like my brother, but wrong. They always look familiar, I said. Until they don't. She closed her eyes. I don't want to be afraid anymore. I stepped closer, then stopped running. Her breath hitched. What happens if I go to them? I reached out, touched her shoulder. Then you remember. She opened her eyes, and I saw it, the flicker, the glimmer of recognition that only comes when the last thread of denial snaps. She wasn't Cam anymore. Not fully. Just like I was no longer the boy who once hid under his bed, praying the shadows would pass. We were becoming. And it felt right. That night, she followed me to the edge of the woods. The trees were still. The clearing waited. We didn't speak. No ritual, no chanting, just presence. And when she stepped into the circle, the others were already there. Those from the town, those who had remembered before her. She joined them like a breath slipping into a waiting lung. And me, I stood at the edge, watching. Because I wasn't part of the ritual anymore. I was the ritual. The mimic had taught me that. The ones who remember guide the next. That's the pattern. That's the rule. The trees do not move. We do. And so I moved again. Another town. Another face. Another flicker behind the eyes of someone waiting for the lie to end. Because the mimic does not spread by claw or scream or violence. It spreads through truth. Through the voice that speaks just beneath your own. Through the reflection that stands still when you walk away. Through the soft, familiar shape watching you from the trees. Smiling. Patient. Waiting for you to recognize yourself. They say if you sit in total silence long enough, you'll begin to hear things that were always there. Blood moving behind your ears, the groan of old pipes, the creak of bones settling. But when I sat in silence now, it wasn't my body I heard. It was others. Their whispers slithered through the stillness like breath through cracked glass. I'd been traveling so long, town to town, memory to memory, that I could no longer remember where the original version of myself had been buried. Each new place blurred into the next, a repetition of faint smiles, careful words, and eyes that flicked just a bit too quickly to the trees. The faces changed, but the pattern didn't. And every time I found someone teetering on the edge of recognition, it was like finding another thread in the same vast web. We weren't scattered anymore. We were woven. The next town didn't even have a name on the welcome sign. Just population 201. Someone had taken a marker and crossed it out, writing 200 underneath. I laughed, quietly, because I knew I hadn't even arrived yet when they wrote that. Someone had disappeared already. Someone had gone into the woods and seen. When I stepped into the town diner, empty save for a waitress and one old man hunched over coffee, both of them looked up, not with curiosity, not suspicion, with something colder, recognition. I didn't speak, I just sat down. The waitress poured me coffee. Her hands didn't shake. "Storm's coming," the old man muttered. I sipped the bitter liquid, kept my eyes on the rain building outside. It's already here. That was all it took. They knew who I was, what I was. They didn't run, didn't scream. They weren't victims. They were keepers, sentinels. Left behind not to warn anyone, but to see who would return. And I had returned. They spoke nothing of names, nothing of places. But their movements told me everything. The way the waitress turned all the mugs upside down after she served me. The way the old man dragged his cane across the floor in a pattern that traced a spiral. These weren't habits. These were signals. Rituals. This town wasn't resisting the mimic. It was honoring it. And I realized then some towns didn't wait to be transformed. They invited it in. After night fell, I walked through the center of the village, the rain now falling thick and slow. The street lamps blinking like they weren't powered by electricity but memory. Dying memories, flickering and relighting, again and again. At the far edge past the school and the rusted swing set no one used, I found it. The tree, singular, ancient, bent and blackened. As if fire had once kissed it but couldn't finish the job. Its bark shimmered faintly under the rain like it was alive. And beneath it, someone waited. A girl, no older than 16. She didn't flinch as I approached. Her eyes tracked mine the way prey watches a predator, but not out of fear. Out of understanding. "You've been dreaming," I said. She nodded. I already knew the details. The forest, the well, the whispers. But she added something I hadn't heard in a while. I saw the mirror break. My breath hitched just slightly. "Did it cut you?" She shook her head. "Not me. It cut the thing wearing me." And that's when I understood. She wasn't like the others. She resisted. Some part of her saw what was happening and tried to pull away. But there's a cost to that. Every resistance leaves a scar, and I could see them in her posture. How she kept one hand clenched, her fingers twitching slightly like she was holding something invisible. "What are you still holding?" I asked. Her voice broke when she answered. "My name." That simple. That powerful. She hadn't given it up yet. Most people do. They let it slip away in conversation, in introductions, in forgotten dreams. But she held hers like a lifeline. And the mimic, our mimic, couldn't fully enter until she let it go. "I can help you forget," I offered gently. She looked at me, water dripping from her hair, eyes wide. "I don't want to forget." And for a moment, I saw the storm not outside, but in her. A war raging behind her ribs. The memory of who she was crashing against, what she was becoming. "I want to choose." Those words hung in the air like lightning waiting to strike, and I felt it then, the forest stir. Not with anger, with interest, because this had never happened before. Not like this. We always guided. They always followed. But she stood at the edge and asked for terms, and the mimic inside me paused, watched, listened. I stepped aside, not out of mercy, out of reverence. Because whatever came next, she would own it. She stepped toward the tree, barefoot, her soles slicing slightly on the blackened roots. She whispered her name, once, clearly, and then let it go. Not to me, not to the forest, but to herself. She claimed the transformation, shaped it with her own voice, and in that moment the mimic didn't consume her. It merged with her. Equal, balanced, something new. And the tree responded. It bloomed, not with flowers, with eyes. Dozens of them, blinking open in the bark, watching her. And for the first time, watching me with something I hadn't felt before. Respect. Because we'd changed the cycle, not broken it, evolved it. The girl turned back. Her hand no longer clenched. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just was. And for the first time in all my travels, I understood that the mimic wasn't just a shadow waiting to devour. It was a mirror waiting for someone to look back without flinching. That night, I left the town without saying goodbye. I didn't need to. They would carry the truth now. A new version. An updated ritual. And I, for once, was no longer the only one watching from the trees. I walked for 3 days after I left that town. No map, no phone. The roads I followed weren't even marked, just thin veins of cracked asphalt winding through dense trees that always seemed to lean in just a little closer when I wasn't looking. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I didn't need to. Whatever lived inside me now, whatever I'd become, ran on something deeper than hunger or rest. I was part of the system now, a limb of the mimic. Not a puppet, but not quite free either. And yet, something stirred in me after that girl stood beneath the blooming tree and chose her path. It wasn't hope. That's too clean a word. It was a crack, hairline, subtle but real. A possibility I hadn't allowed myself to consider. What if we were never supposed to serve the mimic? What if we were meant to shape it? The thought haunted me as I walked. It clung to the edges of my vision. Whispered in the wind that threaded through the branches overhead, the mimic had always been silent in its purpose. Absorbing, reflecting, guiding, but never asking, never offering, until now. And it wasn't just her. Others were changing too. The more towns I visited, the more people I passed, the more I began to notice it. Variations. Slight at first. A man who kept humming a tune I'd only ever heard in dreams. A woman who painted the well from memory, though she claimed she'd never stepped into the forest. And always, the eyes. A flicker of awareness, like they saw past the veil and were waiting for me to speak. But I never did. Because I didn't know what came next. Until I reached the place with no name, no signs, no roads. Just a break in the trees so sudden and perfect it looked designed. The moment I stepped through, I knew I had crossed some boundary. The mimic pulsed louder inside me, not with hunger or command, but with something that felt almost like awe. The air was different here, thicker, more intentional. Every leaf felt placed, Every gust of wind moved with rhythm, and the sky, cloudless, dim, purple, like bruised fruit, hung lower than it should have. I wasn't just somewhere remote, I was somewhere old. In the center of this place was a cabin, small, rotten, half consumed by moss and root, like the earth was trying to reclaim it. I didn't knock. The door creaked open on its own. Inside, the walls were covered with mirrors, dozens, maybe hundreds, all different sizes and styles, no two the same. But they were wrong. They didn't reflect the room. They reflected memories. Mine. Others. All jumbled together like dreams trapped behind glass. I stepped closer to one and saw myself as a child, sitting at Sophie's funeral, unable to cry. Another showed me older, standing in front of the well, screaming into it, my voice swallowed by the dark. Others were worse. Ones I didn't recognize. Lives I'd never lived. In one, I was a father. In another, I was dying in a hospital bed, whispering something to a nurse who looked just like me. They weren't reflections. They were possibilities. And then, from the far corner of the room, a voice spoke. "You've come farther than most." I turned. He sat in a chair made of twisted wood, cloaked in shadow. His face, it wasn't mine, but it was close, like an older version of me that had diverged long ago and taken another path. His eyes glowed faintly, gray and endless. "You were the first," I said. He nodded once. I was the beginning, the first to listen, the first to look back. I felt my throat tighten. "What is this place?" He smiled, and it wasn't kind. "This is where we decide." "Decide what?" "Whether to continue." The walls seemed to breathe with his words. Every mirror shimmered. "You think the mimic just spreads," he said. "That it echoes itself into the next and the next. But it has always needed permission. A spark. A choice. It doesn't move unless we say yes." I stepped toward him. "So why did you say yes?" He looked down at his hands, fingers curled like claws. "Because I was afraid. Because the truth of what I was felt too heavy, too sharp." The mimic offered peace, purpose, something bigger than pain. And now, he looked at me, eyes suddenly sharp. "Now, I think I made a mistake." Silence fell between us, thick and final. "You can still choose," he said, voice quiet. "You're not too far gone. I don't know who I am anymore." "Good," he said. "That means you're ready." He stood, walked past me, and placed a hand on one of the mirrors. It shimmered, changed, and I saw myself again, older, but different. Wearing a coat made of bark, eyes glowing. Smiling as people walked willingly into the forest behind me. "That's what you'll become," he said. "If you say yes again." I turned to him. "And if I don't?" His face went blank. "Then this ends." A beat, and the mimic ends with it. The room pulsed. Every mirror flickered. The choice wasn't about resistance anymore. It was about creation. What do we build with the things that haunt us? Do we hand them over to something ancient and let it wear us? Or do we take them back? Own them. Live with them. I stepped toward the mirror. My reflection stared back. It looked tired. But it was mine. I reached out, touched the glass, and the world shifted. The cabin vanished. The forest fell silent. I stood alone in the clearing again, but something was different. The trees no longer leaned. They listened. And for the first time, the mimic didn't whisper. It waited. For me. Because this time, I wasn't walking its path. I was carving my own. The forest was silent, but it wasn't empty. After the cabin vanished and the mirrors dissolved like mist, I stood alone in the clearing, waiting for something, anything, to respond to what I'd just done. But the trees remained still. No creaks. No whispers. Even the wind had vanished. Like the whole forest was holding its breath. For the first time in what felt like years, the mimic didn't move through me. It didn't press against my thoughts, didn't stir in the marrow of my bones. It simply watched. Not through eyes. Through presence. I couldn't tell if it was waiting for an answer or stunned by the fact I hadn't given one. I took a breath, an actual, full breath, and let it out slowly. My chest felt heavier than before, like every step I'd taken, every person I'd guided, had folded itself into me, and now they were all sitting there, just beneath the surface, watching to see what I would do next. Not the mimic. Them. The people. The ones I'd helped, and maybe even the ones I'd hurt. I thought about the girl beneath the blooming tree, the one who held onto her name like it was a weapon. I thought about Sophie, about the original me, the one who'd stared into the well and seen himself smiling back. What was I now? Not a guide, not a follower, not quite a host, not anymore. I started walking, not toward anything, just forward, letting the trees part as they always had. But something was different this time. They didn't lean in like they used to. They didn't whisper. They gave space. Respect, maybe. Or fear. I didn't know. All I knew was that I had chosen not to let the mimic devour everything, and it hadn't fought me. It hadn't screamed. It had stepped back. That scared me more than anything. I came across a river I didn't remember. It was shallow, winding like a silver thread through the forest floor, and across it, on the opposite bank, was a boy, no older than 10, pale, wide-eyed. He wore clothes that didn't belong to this decade, worn boots, a collared shirt buttoned all the way to the top. He didn't look like he was lost. He looked like he'd been waiting. "Who are you?" I asked, but my voice came out hoarse, dry from the silence. The boy didn't answer. He just pointed behind me. I turned slowly and saw them, dozens of them. Figures emerging from the trees dressed in fragments of my past. My old clothes. Faces I barely remembered. One wore my college jacket. Another looked like me from when I was 12, hair messy, socks pulled high. All silent, all staring. The mimic wasn't hiding anymore. It was presenting, showing me everything it had taken, everything it had built. Each figure was a thread pulled from me, a sliver, a choice, a regret, and I finally understood it had never needed to steal my face. It only needed my permission. And I'd given it 1,000 times, in every denial. Every moment I looked away instead of asking questions. Every time I chose to forget. The boy on the other side of the river stepped forward, still pointing, still silent. I turned back to him and followed his finger. He wasn't pointing at the clearing. He was pointing at me. And suddenly, I remembered. Not a vision. Not a dream. A memory. There had been another me. One buried deeper than all the rest. The first time I saw something watching me from the trees. I wasn't alone. I was with my twin, Daniel, and he hadn't made it out. They told me he drowned in the river when we were kids. But I never saw the body. Never went to the funeral. It had always felt hollow, like someone else had remembered it for me. Now the mimic showed me the truth. Daniel hadn't drowned. He'd crossed, just like I had. But he hadn't come back. He'd become. And the boy across the river. It wasn't Daniel. It was the last piece of me I had left behind. The innocence. The memory. The witness. Still untouched by the cycle. Still holding the truth. If I crossed to him, I would be whole again. But if I stayed, I turned around. Faced the mimic's children. They didn't blink. Didn't move. They waited. Because if I walked away from that river, I wouldn't be a witness anymore. I'd be something else. Something permanent. I looked at the boy. He didn't plead. He just was. I stepped into the water. Cold, sharp, but not deep. It welcomed me. Each step closer made the noise in my head dull. The mimic's weight lessened. The echoes quieted. And when I reached the boy, I felt light. He looked up at me, still silent, still waiting, and then he opened his mouth. But what came out wasn't a scream. It was a song, a single note. Pure, sharp enough to split me. And suddenly I was back in the clearing. Alone. The mimic gone. The trees just trees again. The sky warm. Real. It hadn't punished me for crossing. It had released me. The boy was gone. But I could feel him inside. Not the mimic me, the first me. And now, I had something the mimic never did. Memory, unbroken. True. And I knew, without any doubt, the next time someone saw something watching them from the trees, it would be me. I didn't expect to wake up. Not really. After crossing the river, after touching the boy's hand and hearing that impossible, beautiful sound, I thought maybe that was the end. The closing of the circle. The unmaking of the mimic's last hold on me. But the forest had other plans. I opened my eyes to gray light and the soft hush of wind moving through dry leaves. I was lying on soft earth, not far from where the cabin used to be, but now there was nothing around me but trees. Familiar ones. Watching, always watching, but no longer leaning in. They had pulled back. Not in fear, in respect. For the first time in years, I felt alone inside my own head. No echo, no hum beneath my thoughts, no mimic. Just me. The quiet, stubborn core of my own identity, tired but whole. I sat up slowly, half expecting something to pull me back down. A root, a hand, a memory. But nothing reached for me. Nothing moved except the trees swaying gently above, unconcerned by my return. I was free. Or at least, that's what I told myself. But freedom isn't as clean as you think it will be. It comes with weight, with responsibility. Because now, I wasn't just someone who had survived the mimic. I was someone who understood it. Not as a monster, not as an invader, but as a reflection. A mirror held up to every buried version of ourselves we pretend never existed. It didn't create the darkness. It fed on what we already left behind. The lies we tell ourselves to stay comfortable. The truths we ignore to keep moving. That's how it grows. And now I could see it everywhere. I left the forest that morning with no real plan. I walked until the trees thinned and the sky opened up. Until the crunch of leaves gave way to gravel and pavement. I passed the town I'd just come from, where the girl had bloomed beneath the tree. But I didn't stop. They were fine now. Changed, yes, but balanced. She had figured out how to live with the mimic without letting it define her. Maybe others would too. But there were places that hadn't been so lucky, and I felt drawn to them. One, in particular, waited at the edge of everything. North of the last real highway, nestled in a crook of land no one ever visited unless they were born there. I didn't know the name until I saw the sign Marin's Rest. A rusted plaque, barely readable, with 2 bullet holes in it, and a crow perched on top like it had always belonged there. The town didn't feel dead, but it didn't feel alive either. It was like something had paused it halfway through becoming real. The people I passed didn't look at me. They didn't speak. It was as if they had all agreed, some silent pact, to never acknowledge anything that might make the world crack open. Their eyes flicked to shadows and then looked away, fast, like they knew exactly what was there, but refused to accept it. This was a sick town, not possessed, exhausted, like it had been feeding the mimic for too long. I stayed in an abandoned house just outside the center. It hadn't been boarded up or locked. Nothing was. Why would it be? No one wanted to let anything in, and they certainly didn't expect anything to come out. Dust coated every surface. The mirrors had all been shattered. The beds still made. Whoever had lived there once had left in a hurry or not at all. I found the well behind the church. Covered. Bolted shut with rusted chains and concrete slabs, like someone had tried to bury the memory itself. It didn't work. I could feel the hum beneath my feet. Not strong like it had been before, weaker, dying, starving, but it was still there. The mimic had been cut off, and now it was devouring itself. I stood there for a long time, not knowing whether I wanted to set it free or let it rot. That's when I saw the boy. He stood behind the church, hands deep in his pockets, staring at me without blinking. He couldn't have been older than 7 or 8, too young to wear that kind of expression. Hollow, resigned, ancient. I didn't speak. I just nodded, and he stepped forward slowly, as if it took everything he had to move. "They won't let it go," he said, voice thin, brittle. "Who?" I asked. "The ones who remember too much." And I knew who he meant, not just people. Versions, shreds of thought that had become solid. Memory that had hardened into identity. This town had been caught mid-transformation. too aware to be controlled, too scared to escape. A place where the mimic and the people had dug their nails into each other and never let go. "Are you one of them?" I asked. He shook his head. "I'm what's left." I wanted to reach for him. Offer him what the boy by the river had given me. A way out. A sound that could split the mimic from the soul and set it free. But this was different. This town chose the silence, and the silence had become a cage. So I did the only thing I could. I took a rock from the church steps and smashed the seal on the well. The concrete cracked. The chains snapped, and the hum grew louder, like breath returning to lungs after years underwater. The boy didn't flinch. He only smiled. A small, tired smile that told me he wouldn't last much longer. But the others, the ones hiding in their homes, they would feel it now. They would hear, and they would have to choose. To either let the mimic in fully, or to face what they'd buried and walk away from it whole. Either way, the stasis would break. I walked out of Marin's Rest as the wind picked up and the crows began to circle. Behind me, I could feel it stirring, the forest waking, the mimic reforming, not as a parasite, but as a possibility, one last time. Because the world didn't need more watchers in the trees. It needed people willing to face what watched them back. By the time I reached the next town, the wind had changed. It wasn't just colder. It carried weight now, like it was dragging something behind it. The leaves didn't rustle. They hissed, and every time I stopped walking, I swore I could hear footsteps just half a second behind mine. Not echoes. Mimicry. The forest wasn't following me anymore. It was studying me, testing me, wanting to know what I would do now that I'd broken one of its oldest chains. The town didn't have a name on any sign. Just a collection of broken houses and silent windows tucked in a gully that hadn't seen sunlight in days. It was as if the trees had grown taller around it, curling inward to form a cage of limbs and shadows. No birds, no power lines, no sound, but the wind dragging its weight across rooftops like an animal that couldn't quite die. And in the center of it all stood a single structure, untouched by time or rot, a white house with a wraparound porch and perfectly clean windows. Something waited inside that house. I could feel it. Not the mimic, not entirely. Something older, deeper. It didn't hum or whisper. It remembered. It was a keeper. A part of the mimic that had split off from the rest. An anchor buried in stillness. And I was being drawn toward it, not like prey, but like a thread pulled back into its knot. I walked up the porch steps slowly, boots echoing on old wood. The door wasn't locked. It opened with a breath. The inside smelled of dust and lemon oil. Everything was too clean, too preserved. Photos on the mantel, a newspaper folded neatly on the table, a single coffee cup still half full, except the coffee hadn't cooled. It was steaming. I wasn't alone. I turned, and there she was. An old woman, sitting in a rocking chair near the fireplace that hadn't been lit in years. Her face was lined with time, but her eyes were sharp, too sharp. They locked onto mine with a focus that made my skin crawl. Not because it was threatening, but because it was familiar. She smiled like she already knew me. "You're late," she said. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat tightened, and all I could do was watch as she stood, slowly, moving like someone who had lived inside time long enough to forget how to fear it. "You've been stirring the soil," she said. Digging up what should have been left to rest. I swallowed hard. "The mimic," she raised a hand. "You call it that. But it's only one name. And names are soft. They don't hold weight. What is it then?" Her smile faded. "It's the part of us we threw into the woods and hoped would stay buried. The voice we ignored. The pain we silenced. It's not an invader. It's a mirror." "I know that," I said, stepping forward. She nodded. "But you still came here to end it. I came here to understand it." "No," she said sharply. "You came because you want to decide. You want to choose how the story ends." And suddenly I felt it again. That pull in my chest, like a string had just been yanked taut. She was right. Somewhere beneath all the empathy, all the wandering, I'd come here because I wanted control. The mimic had taken it from me once, and now that I understood it, I thought maybe I could tame it. Shape it. End it. She turned toward the hallway and beckoned me to follow. I did. At the end of the corridor was a door made of black wood, smooth and silent. She placed her hand against it, and it opened without sound. Inside was a mirror, but not like the others. This one was cracked, not shattered, but deeply scored down the middle. It didn't show my reflection. It showed options. One version of me stood beside the well, hands outstretched, calling to the mimic with open arms. Another was in a hospital room, whispering to a woman who looked like Sophie. Another stood at the center of the forest, eyes black and endless, tree roots curling from his arms. All of them were me. All of them had chosen differently. You can pick one, she said. Become it. Let that be your story. I turned to her. Is that what you did? Her gaze didn't shift. No, I chose not to choose. And in doing so, I stayed here. I held the stories still. I became the quiet. And that's when I understood. She wasn't just a keeper. She was the pause in the cycle. The breath before the plunge. A single, living moment between what was and what might be. I looked back at the mirror. The versions of me didn't blink. They waited. And I knew then, none of them were right. Not for me. Because if the mimic was memory, if it was pain made flesh, then the only way forward was to carry it, not wear it, not surrender to it, not bury it. Carry it. I stepped away from the mirror. No, I said. I'm not picking a path. I'm making one. The woman's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the house. Walls groaning, floorboards humming faintly like strings on a cello. She nodded once. Then you'll need this. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a shard of glass. One clean edge. One jagged. I took it. It was warm in my hand, almost pulsing. What is it? I asked. The last reflection you haven't seen yet, she said. And just like that, the house collapsed. Not with sound, with absence. I was outside again, alone, the shard still in my hand, and behind me, the forest pulsed. Not in menace, not in triumph. In readiness. It knew. I wasn't just someone who'd been watched. I was watching back now. The shard pulsed in my hand like a heartbeat. Not loud, not painful. Just steady. Like it was alive, or more accurately, like it carried something that had once been alive and hadn't figured out it was supposed to stop. The forest around me had changed, not in form but in tone. It wasn't just watching now, it was waiting. Every leaf, every branch, every shadow felt stretched thin, pulled tight across some invisible truth that hadn't quite broken through yet. I stood at the edge of that White House's absence, staring down at the sliver of mirror the old woman had pressed into my hand before everything fell away. She'd said it was the last reflection I hadn't seen, but that wasn't what scared me. What scared me was how warm it felt. Memories, no matter how buried, always leave heat behind. And this one, it sizzled under my skin. I didn't know where I was walking anymore. I just knew I had to move. If I stood still, I'd sink. If I breathed too hard, the shard might whisper something I couldn't unhear. The trees let me pass without resistance. They bent, parted, curved like they knew where I needed to go even if I didn't. The mimic wasn't in front of me anymore. It was beneath me, inside me, waiting to see if I'd keep pretending I was separate from it. That illusion had already cracked. I came to a clearing I didn't remember, but recognized instantly. Not in the sense of I've been here before, but in that quiet, ancient way that makes your spine stiffen and your stomach turn. The place where memory and imagination mix so seamlessly that you can't tell if you're remembering or inventing. There were no markings. No well. No cabin. Just grass that hadn't grown right and trees that bent toward each other as if shielding something from above. I stepped into it, and the heat from the shard flared. This was the core, the wound, the point of origin, not for the mimic, But for me, the place where the thing in the trees first looked at me and recognized what I was. It wasn't Daniel's grave. It wasn't Sophie's funeral. It wasn't the night I'd screamed into the well. It was before all of that. A summer afternoon, a game of hide and seek, and the slow, paralyzing realization that I had never been alone. I remember now, I'd hidden behind a tree, trying to stifle my breath while my brother looked for me. But something else found me first. It hadn't touched me. It hadn't spoken. It had only watched. And that gaze, curious, hungry, mirror-like, had etched itself into me. The shard in my hand pulsed harder, and I knew what I had to do. I pressed the jagged edge against my palm. It didn't cut. It opened. The moment my skin split, the clearing shuddered. The ground rippled like a pond. The trees groaned like they were remembering how to scream. And the shard glowed. Not silver, but red. Blood red. My red. The last reflection was me. Not as a host. Not as a guide. Not as the half-lost thing that wandered from town to town. But me, before it all broke. Before Daniel disappeared. Before the mimic whispered. Before I learned to lie to myself and call it protection. I saw the child in the reflection. Barefoot. Wide-eyed. Holding a stick like a sword and smiling like the world hadn't begun to rot yet. And then I saw the change. The moment the smile cracked. The moment the eyes darkened. The moment the watching began. The shard slipped from my hand and landed point first in the earth. Light erupted, not fire, not wind, just truth, raw and unwelcome. Every lie I'd ever told myself burned away in that clearing. Every excuse. Every moment I said it was someone else. Gone. And from that light came a figure. Not the mimic, not Daniel. Me. But not a reflection, not a copy, not a past, a version, one I hadn't chosen, one I could choose now. He stepped forward, barefoot like the boy, taller like the man I had become. His face was mine, but didn't carry the exhaustion, the weight. It carried resolve. He didn't speak because he didn't need to. He was the choice. To live without running, to move forward without becoming, to carry the mimic not as a curse, but as a witness. The figure held out a hand, and for the first time I didn't hesitate, I took it. And when I did, the clearing vanished. No noise, no smoke, just gone. I stood alone in a patch of forest I didn't recognize. But it didn't matter. I knew where I was going now, because I wasn't just someone who had seen something watching from the trees. I was the one watching back. And I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of the mimic, not of myself, not of what came next. I didn't know how long I'd been walking. Only that each step no longer felt like running from something, but toward it. The trees still moved around me like they always had, reshaping the paths, closing some, opening others. But I could tell they were doing it for a different reason now. Not to lead me into another trap. Not to confuse. They weren't testing me anymore. They were watching with something like curiosity, as if even they didn't know what I was about to do. That unsettled me more than I expected. For so long, the mimic had felt like a force of control, of certainty. It had rules, patterns, a system. Now, that system had been cracked, and I was the one who fractured it. The towns had grown stranger the farther I moved. Not stranger in design. No, they looked normal enough. Streetlights still buzzed. Front yards still had toys and rusted bikes. But there were no people. Not even a whisper of them. Not a window flickering. Not a voice. Just towns full of evidence someone had been there. But that someone had either been erased or wasn't people anymore. The mimic had done something here. And I feared this might be what happens when no one chooses. When the mimic is neither embraced nor rejected, just left to fester. In the last of these hollow towns, I found a sign hanging from a broken chain fence. Not a warning, not a direction, just a word carved into wood with shaking hands still. I stared at it for a long time. Still, as in silent. Still, as in here. Still, as in unmoving. I didn't know. But the word crawled into my head and clung there. I pushed forward into the center of the town, where the buildings grew tighter and the roads began to fold in on themselves, like someone had started to draw a maze and given up halfway. And in the very center, there was something impossible, a tree. One I'd seen before. The same ancient, gnarled black tree that had bloomed with eyes when the girl in the earlier town made her choice. Except this one was dying. Its bark peeled away in long, curling strips. Its roots were dry, brittle, bone-white. The eyes were closed, sealed over like scars. This was what the mimic looked like when no one looked back. It wasn't evil. It was starved. It fed on acknowledgement, on recognition. Not worship, not obedience. Just being seen. I approached it slowly, hearing my own breath echo louder than it should have in the stillness. As I stepped within arm's reach of the trunk, I heard something creak behind me. Not the trees. A door. One of the buildings nearby. I turned and saw movement. A shadow ducking into a doorway. I followed. Inside, the house was dim and empty, save for a boy crouched near a window. He didn't look up when I entered. "You came late," he said. My throat tightened. I didn't know I was expected. He nodded like he'd heard that before. Everyone comes late. That's why the tree's dying. I stepped closer. He looked familiar. Not like someone I knew, but like someone I could have been. Same eyes, same scar above the brow. A mirror, twisted just slightly. "What's your name?" I asked. He looked up at me, finally, and smiled. But it wasn't kind, you know it. The mimic hadn't disappeared from these towns. It had settled. Become memory that wouldn't decay. Grief that wouldn't rot away. It had taken root in the spaces between what people refused to feel. This boy, this version of me, had stayed behind. Not because he was trapped, but because he refused to forget. "Do you want to be free?" I asked. He shook his head. "Freedom is forgetting." I want to be real. That stopped me cold. Because that's what this had always been about, hadn't it? Not escaping. Not fighting. Becoming real. Accepting the parts of ourselves that hurt, that haunted, that watched from the trees. And the mimic, it only ever reflected what we wouldn't face. I reached out to him, not to take, not to command, to join. He grabbed my hand without fear. His grip was firm, warm. The moment our skin touched, I felt the rush, not of visions, but of weight. A flood of memories that weren't mine, but were about me. People I'd passed, helped, hurt, forgotten. They were all here, gathered like dust in the corners of this dead town. And now I saw them clearly. The mimic hadn't been consuming us. It had been collecting us, trying to make us whole. We had blamed it because it looked strange, acted strange, felt strange. But it had never lied. It had only shown what was already there, and we hated it for that. When the boy let go, the light in the house changed. Warmer, softer. Outside, I saw the impossible. The tree was blooming again, not with eyes. With hands, dozens of them, reaching from its branches, not grasping, not pulling, just open, offering. Ready to help anyone who would reach back. I stepped outside. The stillness of the town had changed. Doors opened. Lights flickered. People, actual people, stepped out from buildings, blinking in the daylight like they hadn't seen it in years. Their faces were blank at first. But then, recognition. They remembered. They saw me, not as a savior, not as a prophet, as a mirror. And some of them smiled. Because sometimes being seen, truly seen, is all we need to start living again. I left the town before nightfall. Didn't look back. Didn't need to. Because the thing that used to haunt me from the trees, it wasn't haunting anymore. It was waiting for the next person to look up and not look away. I left the town with the blooming hand, tree behind me, walking into a night that didn't feel like night. There was no moon, but the forest glowed faintly. Not with light, exactly, but with memory. Every tree I passed felt familiar, as though I'd walked this path before in a dream I could never quite recall. And now that dream had woken up and was watching me with quiet anticipation. The wind didn't move, but the leaves trembled anyway. Shadows passed through branches without any source, and though I was alone, I felt surrounded. Not by threat, but by attention. Like the forest was listening for what I would do next. Like the mimic, or whatever remained of it, had shifted roles. It wasn't chasing anymore. It was following. Not far ahead, the trail forked. Left, the forest thickened. The trees grew tighter together, limbs twisted and arched over the path, forming a tunnel so dark, even sound didn't seem to enter. Right, the path opened into a clearing filled with starlight, where tall grass moved without breeze and stones formed broken shapes that might once have been sacred. I didn't choose either. I sat between them, because for the first time in all this, I wasn't going somewhere. I wasn't hunting, fleeing, or answering any call. I just was. And in that stillness, something began to rise. At first, I thought it was smoke, curling up from the soil. But it didn't sting the air or smell like fire. It shimmered, silver and slow, like breath in cold air. It moved toward me, wrapping gently around my arms, my legs, my face, not binding, not suffocating, just acknowledging. The way a hand on your shoulder means I see you, without needing words. Then it changed shape. A figure stood before me, no eyes, no mouth. Just an outline of a person formed from that same silver shimmer. And I knew, without being told, this was the first one who saw the mimic, who listened to it, who let it in. Not the old man I met in the cabin. No, this one came before that, before language, before grief, before even memory had a name. It knelt beside me, and from its chest a single pulse of light bloomed, a seed, not metaphorical, a real, glowing seed that hovered between us, radiating a warmth that pulsed like a heartbeat not yet born. I didn't speak, because this was not a moment for speech. It placed the seed in my hand and closed my fingers around it, and I understood. This was the end, not of me, of the cycle. The mimic, the reflections, the watching, the transformations. It had always been building toward this, toward a passing of weight. The mimic wasn't something to be destroyed. It was something to be planted, grown, shared. And I, somehow, had become its gardener. The figure vanished. The seed remained, and the path before me cleared, not left, not right, but forward. Straight through the heart of the forest, where the trees stood aside like old sentries finally stepping down from their posts. I walked, not hurried, not afraid, just steady. Each step pressed the seed deeper into my skin until I couldn't tell where it ended and I began. My blood hummed with new roots. My bones carried echoes not just of what I'd lived, but of everyone who had ever faced the watching thing and walked away changed. I wasn't a host anymore. I wasn't a vessel. I wasn't even a man carrying a burden. I was the next keeper. But this time, it wouldn't be hidden. This time, it wouldn't be locked behind trees or buried beneath wells or whispered into mirrors. It would grow, in daylight, where people could choose to see it, or not. The final stretch of the forest opened wide, and I emerged into a hilltop meadow at dawn. The sky blood pink and orange over a horizon so still it looked painted. I stood in the center and dropped to my knees, placing my hand on the earth. The seed inside me pulsed once more, and leapt. I felt it leave, felt it bury, felt it begin, and as the sun rose, the grass around me turned gold. Not from sunlight, from memory. The mimic had changed, and this time it was inviting us to change with it. When the sun finally breached the horizon and spilled across the meadow, the warmth felt unfamiliar, not just in temperature, but in intention. It was no longer the harsh light that once felt like exposure, something that could chase shadows back into the trees. It felt softer now, like it had been waiting for permission to shine. And somehow I had given it. I sat there in the grass, fingers still tingling from where the seed had left my skin. The soil beneath me was quiet, but not dead. I could feel a pulse in it now, faint but steady, like something beneath the earth had started breathing for the first time in a very long time. I didn't know what the seed would become, not really, but I didn't need to. That wasn't the point anymore. For so long I had chased answers, clarity, something final that would let me sleep without looking over my shoulder. But now I understood. There was no final form. The mimic was never meant to be understood like that. It was a presence that lived in the tension between what we wanted to forget and what refused to be erased. A mirror, yes, but also a map, one drawn in the shape of our own shame, our grief, and our unspoken truths. And I had planted it, not to lock it away, but to let it grow in the open. Let people see it. I didn't know how long I sat there. Long enough for the shadows to crawl back under the hills, long enough for the trees to stop watching and simply be trees again. I expected someone, or something, to come, to greet me, to question me. But no one did. There were no voices, no shimmer figures, no watchers. Just the wind rolling through the grass and the slow, steady return of birdsong. It felt like waking up from a very long dream, one where every version of yourself had been running in circles and finally fell still enough to listen. Eventually I stood. My body ached in ways that didn't feel entirely physical, like my muscles had carried too many selves, too many timelines. The mimic hadn't just haunted me, it had held me, shaped me, molded me. And now that it no longer pulled at the edges of my thoughts, I had to learn how to walk as just one version again. I didn't know if I could, but I had to try. I left the meadow, walking downhill into a forest that felt thinner, more honest. No strange curves in the path, no walls of branches bending like jaws. It felt like a place, not a trap. And at the edge of it all, I saw the road. The first real road I'd seen in days, maybe weeks. Gravel and dirt flattened into the shape of direction, and I knew this was where it would begin again. Not the cycle. Something else. Something slower. There was a figure standing near the road. At first, I thought it was just another stranger, a drifter like me. But as I got closer, I saw her face. Sophie, not the memory, not the mimic's echo of her. Her. She looked older than I remembered, but not aged, just more real. She smiled when she saw me. Like she'd known I would come eventually, like she'd been waiting at the edge of this place. For the moment, I decided to stop running. "You look different," she said. "So do you." We stood there for a while, neither of us saying the things we wanted to. There were too many of them. Too many versions. Too many scars. But in her eyes I didn't see blame. I didn't see fear. I saw the same thing I saw in the forest after the seed was planted: possibility. "What now?" I asked. She looked down the road toward the rising sun. "We walk, we talk, we tell people what we saw, what we carried, what we let go of. You think they'll believe it? Doesn't matter," she said. It was never about belief. It was about remembering. She reached out and took my hand, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the cold press of mimicry under my skin. I felt something alive. We walked. Down the road, past the edge of the trees, back into a world that had no idea what waited beneath its soil, but might be ready to learn. And behind us, far off in the meadow, something began to grow, not in silence, not in secret, but in song. The road we walked stretched on, cutting through stretches of countryside that felt untouched by whatever had festered back in the woods. It was jarring at first, how normal everything looked. Fresh dew on the fields, fence posts leaning slightly but not broken, the distant hum of insects. No mimicry, no flickering silhouettes, no shifting reflections watching from behind the glass. Just life as most people knew it. But I had changed. Sophie had too, and we both felt it in every breath, every step. The world hadn't shifted, we had. And we could no longer pretend we didn't know what was beneath its surface. We stopped at a gas station in the middle of nowhere. It should have been empty, and yet, behind the counter, a teenager scrolled on his phone like this was any other day. He looked up briefly, gave a tired smile, and went back to whatever screen kept him company. To him, we were just travelers. Dirty, probably haunted, but unremarkable. That used to offend me, back when I wanted someone to notice, to ask, Where have you been? But now, the silence was a gift. It gave us space to feel the change without having to explain it. Sophie grabbed 2 waters and dropped some cash on the counter. The boy didn't even count it. We left, walking behind the station, to sit beneath the single tree rooted in a stretch of dying grass. It was crooked, bark peeling, half dead, but it stood. That was enough. She broke the silence first. Do you think anyone else has made it out? I didn't answer right away. I watched the clouds pass like slow thoughts overhead. I thought about the girl beneath the blooming tree, the man with the mirror shack in the hills, the boy who watched from the riverbank, and all the people in Marin's Rest who had chosen silence over memory. I thought about all the versions of me still walking, still hiding, still trapped. Some of them, I finally said. Enough, maybe. She nodded slowly. Do you think it's over? That question felt heavier than the silence that followed. I turned toward her, saw the way her hands curled slightly in her lap like she was bracing for the answer. No, I said. But I don't think it's the same anymore. The mimic was still out there. Not hunting, not luring, just waiting. That was what the seed had changed. The mimic wasn't a predator now. It was a possibility, and people would still find it. Or it would find them. But it wouldn't take, not like before. It would show. And what people did after seeing it, that was up to them. Then we need to talk about it, she said. We need to tell them. That hit me harder than I expected. For so long, this story had been mine, my wound, my secret. To share it meant losing ownership. But that was the whole point, wasn't it? For truth to matter, it had to be shared. Even if it changed along the way. Even if people didn't believe it. The seed wasn't just memory. It was invitation. We got up and kept walking. Not toward any place specific. Just forward. Past towns that hadn't rotted. Past people who still looked at their own reflections without fear. And in each place, we told the story, little by little. Not the full tale, not at first, just fragments, whispers, moments. The tree that blinked, the mirror that sang, the silence that listened. Some laughed, some turned away, but a few leaned in, listened, heard, and that was enough. It started small. A stranger who admitted he'd heard footsteps in his house for weeks. A woman who said she'd seen her daughter walking in the woods at night, except her daughter had been asleep in bed. A man who stopped shaving because he swore the mirror made his face smile back wrong. They didn't call it the mimic. They didn't even call it strange. They just said, I thought I was the only one. We told them they weren't. And when they asked what it wanted, we told them the truth. It doesn't want anything. It just wants to be seen. That's when we realized this wasn't a horror story anymore. It was a history. A memory passed between hands, across miles, between strangers who would never meet, but all carried the same weight in their chest. And the more we spoke it, the more the mimic shifted, became something less sinister, less hungry, not softer, not safer, but known. Eventually, we stopped walking. We settled in a town that hadn't yet been touched. No watchers in the windows, no echoes beneath the floors, just people. Living, hiding their fears like everyone else. But we stayed, and we waited. And then one day, a girl came running through the street, screaming that something was standing in the trees. We looked at each other, and we knew it had begun again. But this time, we were ready. The girl's scream fractured, the peace like a stone hurled into still water. It wasn't fear that sent her sprinting through the streets. It was recognition. That's what struck me first. Her eyes weren't wide with confusion or madness. They were focused, alert. She'd seen something, and unlike most who flinched and forgot, she ran to tell someone. That was the first sign things were changing. Not in the mimic. In us. Sophie and I stepped outside. The sun still warm on the sidewalk, the town still whole. No broken windows, no echoing silence. Just birdsong, wind, and a thread of unease running beneath it all. The girl pointed toward the tree line behind the school. Her voice shook, but she wasn't crying. It was tall, she said, and it didn't blink. Those words settled into me like an old coat I hadn't worn in years. Familiar, heavy, and this time, not cold, just known. We followed her to the edge of the woods. The trees stood quiet, tall, their shadows long across the grass. I could almost hear my heartbeat in the silence. Not because I was afraid, but because I remembered what it felt like to be watched from those trees. To wonder if the thing inside them was a monster, or just a forgotten version of myself reaching back. I crouched, looked the girl in the eye, and asked, "What did you feel when you saw it?" She thought about that. Really thought. Then said, like I was supposed to follow it. I smiled. Not because that was comforting, but because it was honest. That's how it always began. The mimic never took you by force. It invited you to choose. To remember what you didn't want to feel what you'd buried. That choice, that ache, was the first step into the woods, but she hadn't followed. She had run and told someone, and that was new. Sophie and I stood at the tree line as the girl's footsteps faded behind us. The air was still. The trees no longer leaned in. They stood in quiet anticipation, like listeners in a sacred place. I didn't need to go into the woods. Not this time. I'd already made my walk through memory and mirror and mimicry. But someone would. Someone always would. That was the truth of it. The mimic wasn't gone. It never would be. Not because it couldn't be defeated, but because it shouldn't. It wasn't a monster. It was a reflection, a question, an invitation, and we needed it. To remind us that grief left too long in silence would twist itself into something unrecognizable. That shame buried too deep would, one day, sprout roots and rise again. That if we turned away from the dark parts of ourselves long enough, they'd come find us. But now we had language for it, a story. And stories, once spoken, lose their teeth and grow hands. They reach, not to drag, to offer. Sophie and I walked back into town. We started to write, on paper, on walls, on whispers passed through neighbors' kitchens and over cups of weak coffee. We didn't preach. We didn't warn. We just told. We told of a cabin that no longer existed, of a boy by the river, of mirrors that didn't reflect, of wells that hummed, of trees that remembered. We told of the mimic, but not as a curse, as a threshold, and people listened. Some rolled their eyes, some laughed, but some, just enough, sat in silence afterward, staring into corners of their own minds they hadn't visited in years. Those were the ones who mattered. They would carry it. They would plant the next seed. The mimic didn't need to be everywhere. It just needed to be carried. Not like a wound, but like a torch. So when someone sees something watching from the trees, when they feel that ache in their chest they can't quite name, when their reflection flickers or a voice echoes back something they didn't say, they won't panic. They'll pause. They'll ask the question, not what is that, but what is it showing me? And then maybe they'll watch back. Because that's how it starts. Not with fear, with curiosity. And if they're lucky, with someone beside them who's seen it too, who remembers, who knows, and who isn't afraid to tell the story.